it, shall we? Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. Last week we spent some more time with the protagonist of this lovely, lovely novel we're reading, Dana, as she continued to enjoy the glories of a solarpunk lifestyle, one spent in community with not only your fellow person but also nature around you. All very exciting stuff. She spent some time tending to a large orchard. She spent some time working on expanding said large orchard. It was really like fantastic stuff. And then, surprise, surprise, she gets an email from someone she has a little bit of a crush on. And he says, "Hey, I've got something. You remember that audio tape I showed you a while back of this band? They're having a show. Do you think you can make it out to this show?" So they go to this show, and it's a grand old time. And then, eventually the show transforms into a sort of rave out in the desert. It's very satisfying to read and think about. And that's kind of in a nutshell where we left off with Wheelers. If you missed the first episode as well, in a nutshell, this young lady Dana, she gets priced out of her house because she can't pay her copyright infringement fees because essentially every like idea is copywritten to a degree that you can get fined as a singular person for using anything but the bare minimum in life, and everything that is the bare minimum in life you're going to get charged through the nose for. So, eventually Dana uh, gets priced out of being able to live in this city that claims that the rest of the world is a horrifying dystopian hellscape outside the city. But her brother lives outside the city, and her brother says, "Listen, I have a way for you to live out here, and I can save you." And lo and behold, the city has been either lying or is entirely unaware of the world outside the city. These people are living in community with each other. They are sharing as much as they can, sharing as much as they can. They're building their own essentially ecosystem from the ground up, and it just seems like such a better way of life. But Dana is still conflicted because if she rats out the people in the wasteland that are helping her brother, the Wheelers, she gets a little money kickback from the copyright infringement enforcers called the Fringers. But the more she learns about Wheeler Society, the more she really loves it and clearly is hesitating whether she wants to give in to that. If you want to have a more full understanding of the story, there are episodes previous to this where we read more of Wheelers. Which, by the way, Wheelers is not our standard public domain fare around here. This is actually by author permission. I did not write this. Matt Stevens did, and it's been a really great read so far, and I've really been enjoying it. And I hope you have been too. Of automated captions, which is something of note. Uh, that is to say, the automated captions. If you, the podcast listener, are having trouble keeping track, for this book in particular, as it's not public domain, it's not going to be free for you to access. So the link in the show notes will only do you so much if you don't have any money. Of note here is the fact that I have an automated captions system running when I am recording this live. And so if you're having trouble following, the VOD would be of use here. The VOD on YouTube, that is to say. Not only because the text of the book is shown on screen, but also because there's a caption file there. Between those two things, you should have a de facto transcript of the podcast itself. Actually, Now that I think about it, can I upload like transcript files for my podcast like to the RSS feed, or is that something I'd have to bolt on to a website? Let me write that down. That's a question for future me. Can I upload captions for my podcast? Can I upload transcripts to my RSS feed for the podcast? Let me just write that down so I don't forget about it. The caption files for the podcast to the RSS feed directly, or is the transcript a broader website job? Because if you think about it, a lot of podcasts have transcripts, and that's kind of the idea behind me linking to the book in the show notes is using that as a de facto transcript. That doesn't really work for books like Guarding Gus or Wheelers, where I can't freely distribute the book to you. That's not allowed. It's under copyright, and furthermore, I've told the authors I wouldn't be doing that. So, I don't want to be that guy. Uh so that's something to think about. Ooh, speaking of Guarding Gus, actually, now that I've brought it up, that one should be available in your local library now. The author has worked out uh, the process of getting it into, I believe the system is Ingram Spark, which I have neglected that I should reach out to Mr. Stevens for finding out whether this can make it into libraries and what that process might look like. Ooh, but one thing I did not neglect. Last time I mentioned that I needed to look up a few things, one of them being the process of producing a Singer sewing machine. An older style Singer sewing machine, not like the little ones that are like fully self contained and have a bunch of different stitch styles and everything. Like the old like treadle style of a Singer sewing machine. And having looked at some of the documentation available freely on the internet, they absolutely could do this. Whether they would have the given files, that's another thing. But if they had the given files, as it does sound like a good deal of information has made it out into the world, it would make sense that they could, with the ability to even do sintered metal printing, as long as they were capable of sanding the parts afterward, they could make Singer sewing machines. I read an article or two about kite generators and how the kite generator tech has kind of been co-opted in an attempt to produce tidal energy, like tidal, a generator that uses the waves of the ocean, but I haven't fully understood what's going on there. But that's more research for me later. Uh, anyway, all that said, let's dive in, shall we? Where did we leave off? We left off right here. It was well into the night before Dana lost steam. It was clear some of them would keep going till dawn, but Dana wasn't one of them, and Morris was the same. But it was more than just a good date. The energy flowing through the crowd was sensational, and this time Dana wasn't a frightened observer. The whole crowd was dancing together. Dana had been learning about how organic systems assisted each other and worked together to be healthier and stronger. Suddenly, she was part of the crowd, part of the organism. The scrapyard where Morris and I first met, I felt like I was on another planet, she thought with a smile, and leaned against him on the motorcycle. It was a great night, she murmured to him. It's not necessarily over yet, Morris said with a purr, and Dana felt her stomach do a happy flip. Then Morris's device chimed. Mounted between the handlebars, the screen was his dashboard, and Dana saw a new alarm, something she hadn't seen before. I don't recognize that icon. I do. Morris had changed, as though he'd shifted in density all of a sudden. It's an emergency signal. One of the networks calling for help. Dana leaned closer to peer over his shoulder. Another weather event? She scanned the horizon. It was clear night sky as far as she could see. No, this kind of signal means violent attack. Someone's in danger. He pulled the motorcycle to a halt. I can't take you with me on this one. If someone's under attack, what makes you think you'd fare any better in battle than I would? I probably wouldn't, but I'm a doctor. If somebody's hurt, I have to go. I do not, however, wish to take you along if there's danger. If you get shot, the date's going to be memorable for all the wrong reasons. Dana couldn't help but smirk. I get that, but we've only got the one motorcycle, and we're halfway between the concert and the rig. You either leave me on the side of the road, or you can take me with you. I can drop you back with your brother, then go. If someone's hurt, you can't waste time. You're a doctor. Morris stared at her. I can remember a time when you would have stayed out of it. Me too, but right now, I'm feeling lucky. They rode fast for almost 2 hours. It was dark, but the sky was clear and the moon was bright. Dana saw the smoke first. There! The bike ran whisper quiet on batteries, and as they got closer, Morris turned the gears lower, creeping slowly on their target. Morris brought them to a halt, and they moved closer on foot, silent as they could be. The smoke was pouring off a Wheeler rig that Dana hadn't seen before. It had been attacked by something that had detonated the whole thing, smoke pouring out as the flames smoldered low. The battle, such as it was over. But as they got closer, Dana could finally see past the smoke, at the area itself. Behind the rig was an open scar on the ground, clearly going deeper. The edge of it included stairs that led downwards. Dana got the sense that there was much more below. I've never been here before. I have. It's a pretty regular stop for people who can't haul cargo. See the wrecked rig? He pointed at the smoke. It's an unusual design. It doesn't look like any of the other rigs I saw at Xanadu. Well, it's not meant to move far. That rig's meant to move in and out of the area when it's safe to go unnoticed. Comes out of its hiding place maybe twice a month. So this isn't one of the freeholds? It's a salt mine, one of the few resources that can't be mobile. Morris was about to say more when his device chimed again. Dana hissed at the sound, which felt loud as a siren in the dark, haunted night. He ran back to the bike and set it to silent. When he saw the screen, he crept back to Dana. Your brother's here. Your brother's here. He was close enough to get the SOS, too. Dana scanned the horizon. Where? On the far side of the mine. It took a while to go far enough around the whole scene to avoid notice, but the bike was fast and quiet. The same could not be said for the rig. Dean and Freya had kept all the lights off, and in the night it would have been impossible to stumble on them without directions from the devices. Dean visibly relaxed when he saw Dana safe and sound. So, how was the concert? Also, additionally of note here, they mentioned this bike being completely silent. Can confirm. Admittedly, I'm speaking from experience of an electric car, but if my car did not make a noise to alert pedestrians, like it makes this kind of like noise, like intentionally through speakers, if it did not make that noise, it would be pretty much silent, especially in like you would hear more of the noise of the tires and like the car moving itself than you would from the engine. The engine is almost completely silent. Like you can hear a little bit of a whir when you're really pushing it. So I'm picturing that. Like this bike does not obviously have the like the required safety noise that they put into an electric car. And so it's just kind of like like it makes a little electric hum and like the crackle of tires over sand, and that's about it, is what I'm picturing here. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to do my stretches tonight, so I might be a little yawny. Marco stayed with the rig over his strongest objections. He argued that a kid was the smallest and thus the best person to sneak up on any danger. He was overruled by everyone. Dean and Freya crept up to the burning rig from one direction, with Dana and Morris coming from the opposite side. From the western side of the salt mine, Dana could see what had been hidden by the smoke when she made her first approach. Between the rig and the mine was a familiar sight that made Dana's blood run cold. It's a Fringer van. We see those in the city all the time. She smirked slightly at Morris. At least we do down in Green Sector. Her device buzzed. You see it too? She whispered through the comm. I do, but what's it doing this far out? Dean agreed. Why do the Fringers even take prisoners? Freya said into her own comm. I thought they just fined you and took your money. They do, but most people have to pay off debts at work parties. Someone fails to show up or tries to escape the more distasteful work, well, those vans are a real strong deterrent. You get hauled into one of those, it means they've picked you for the very worst kind of work. Dana interjected. You spend a few months manacled to other debtors, scrubbing out sewage in a literal chain gang. Dean trailed off. Which doesn't explain why it's out this far. There's no way they could have brought workers out to a salt mine. The van would make a good prison cell, Freya offered. Marco, get on the database. Find out who's on duty at the mine. One sec, the kid responded, and he answered a moment later. Just one person. Suresh, Arcadian Registry XP995. That's his rig on fire, Dean agreed, and Dana realized she could see those numbers written on the wreck. She filed that thought away for later. The Wheelers have their own registry to keep track of everyone. The hatch to the Fringer van opened, and two people stepped out. One of them had bloodied knuckles, but the other one seemed more bored than anything else. It's a Fringer van, but those aren't Fringer uniforms. I only see two of them. I caught a glance inside before they shut that hatch again. Morris leaned closer to share her calm, and even under present circumstances, Dana noticed the proximity of their lips. They've got Suresh. He looks pretty bad. I think he might have been in that rig when they burned it. He needs a doctor, and he needs one fast. Did you see anyone else in that prison van? Nobody. Whoever these guys are, I think they're working alone. I think I recognize them, Freya offered. I think they're the Veretti twins. Banner put out an alert about them a while ago, warning that they might be working for the city. If they're out here with Fringer gear, that's a given, Dean said. Nobody uses Fringer equipment without being on their payroll. Dana thought of Crawley's radio again and felt a twinge, but she pushed that aside. If there are only two of them with guns versus the four of us with good intentions at best. I don't like those odds. In a fight, neither do I, but if there's one thing I've learned from life out here, it's that living in a great big nowhere is more dangerous than any weapon. That's why wheelers are so important. Without transport, you've got nothing. Silence filled the air. Dana's right, Freya said finally. We've got two rigs and a motorcycle. They've only got that van. At least that's all we know of. All right. Dana, get back to Freya's rig. I'll tell you the plan when you get here. Morris, you got your doctoring bag? All on the motorcycle? Then you're with me. The Veretti twins were in the middle of a heated discussion. If he dies, we've got nothing. Well, it's your fault. You were the one that tried to burn him out. I didn't hear you complaining when he surrendered. We gotta call it in. We call this in, and Crawley will tell us to let him die. We won't be far behind him. Even if you were willing to risk it, he doesn't have that long. Look, you know where we can get him medical care. We're not going back to Arcadia. We're already iced with them. They find out who we're working for. They won't just put us out in the cold this time. They broke off their conversation as they heard a buzzing sound. A familiar, high-pitched motor. Drone! Dana watched through her device as Freya's small camera drone flew toward the van, low and fast. The perspective on the screen swept up to the doors as if peering at the lock. The two men came around the side of the van, and Dana quickly directed the drone to turn and fly back toward her, as if caught out. One of the twins jumped up to the side of the van and had turned the mounted spotlight in that direction that the drone had flown. The bright beam caught the small drone and her. Dana looked away from her device up at the light in shock before she turned and ran into the dust directly away from them. Get her! One of the twins shouted, and they came running after her. Back behind them, at the Fringer van, Dean and Morris came slithering out of the dark as quietly as they could. Once they saw the twins go running after Dana, Morris went to the rear compartment where Suresh was chained up, covered in his own blood. Dean rushed to the driver's seat and started them moving in the opposite direction to Dana. Morris checked Suresh carefully and wasn't liking what he found. He keyed his comm urgently. Dean, he's in a bad way. I don't know how long they've had him here, but he needed help hours ago. Can he be moved? Morris wanted to say no, but recognized the problem. Not far. Copy that. Freya, bring the rig to us. We can't move Suresh to you. Dana, if you can hear me, we're going to have to lead them on a merry chase. Dana had sprinted into the night with the twins in pursuit. She only had to go a short way to reach the bike, but they were faster than her, and gaining quickly when Dean's message to play for time reached her. She swung a leg over Morris's motorcycle and tapped at the on switch. The twins couldn't see, but she actually wasn't hitting the button. Come on, she shouted at the dead motorbike. Start! Heart racing from the adrenaline, Dana let them get closer before she actually got the bike running. The printed motorcycle had no engine to rev up. She could go from dead stop to top speed in seconds. She twisted the throttle hard, sending clouds of dust flying into the air before the wheels got traction, and Dana shot out of sight from them into the darkness. The twins gave up the chase when the spotlight behind them suddenly switched off and they both spun. Oh God, she was a decoy! They ran back the way they came and quickly lost their way in the dark. When they adjusted to being without the spotlight, the twins started moving again, but by then their van had been moved. What do we do now? One of them hissed at the other. The spotlight came on again, lighting the two of them up. Dean's voice came over the Fringer van's crowd-control loudspeaker. Do not move. The twins obeyed. We've got the only transport, and it's still several hours until dawn. It's a walk of multiple days to get anywhere that might take you in. Your provisions are here in this van. It's pretty clear you've got nowhere to go. The twins looked at each other and opted for bravado. We've got backup coming, one of them yelled across to Dean. You'll be overrun in seconds once they get here. Surrender and we'll be merciful. Well then, we'd better leave right away, Dean said, easily, and the spotlight switched off. Wait, we were bluffing, you can't leave us back here, the other twin shouted in a panic. The light switched back on. Alright, here's the deal. You guys will come here one at a time and climb into the prisoner section of the van. I'll then drive you away from the mine and leave you in the van at a safe distance with the prisoner hatch secured. Our people will collect you in the morning while we tend to your victim. Dean's tone was cold, and it was clear he was willing to abandon them into the wastelands if they said no. The twins traded a look, and one of them approached first with his hands up. The prisoner section of the van was empty now, with no sign of Suresh, except for a large blood stain in the middle of the floor. Once they were both seated, the hatch swung shut and the locks engaged. A moment later, the van started moving. Real quick, just fix my hair. It came undone. And that simply won't do. Anyway. Dana kept pace with the prison vehicle until Dean pulled it to a halt. He'd driven back and forth, gone in a circle or two until their prisoners would be completely lost. Once he pulled it over, Dana came to a halt. Her brother climbed onto the motorcycle behind her, and she drove them back towards the salt mine. Will they be okay in there? This time of year, it's not going to cook them like an oven. They'll be okay until Banner can get them. What happens then, it's up to him. He nudged his sister. You're pushing this bike around like you own it. Should probably get you one of these. The throttle's kind of twitchy, but I'm getting there. Riding a bike's pretty intuitive. Dana nodded, pleased with herself, before she returned to the earlier subject. It was kind of easy to fool them if you think they're behind the attacks on Miller's scrapyard or... No, no. The Veretti twins got iced out ages ago. Thank God they're so stupid. If one had stayed guard on Suresh when you played decoy, we could be dead right now. They're involved in all their hired goons. More likely, they're running a side hustle. Salt is one of the few commodities we can provide that the city still has an interest in. It's really that valuable? It's still frontier living in the freeholds. Refrigeration takes a lot of power. You can preserve your meat stock by salting it straight from the grow tanks, then that's power saved. How they did it in the days before refrigeration. I guess that makes sense. I just worry about the van. That was Fringer equipment. If these guys are hired muscle, then it's a pretty safe bet who hired them. Agreed. Ian seemed concerned about it too. By now, Frail have called it in. Banner will see it as more escalation. He might be right. And if they're already hiring your malcontents to make attacks on wheelers or freeholds, the next step will be sending fringers directly. A war, Dean scowled. Hasn't happened since long before Shashan. Maybe not since the collapse. They rode silently for a while, and Dean changed the subject deliberately, trying to force a little cheer. So, other than all of that, how'd the big date go? Suresh wasn't on Freya's rig. Morris needed an operating room. Freya had set up a tent large enough to give Morris room to work and keep the dust out. Marco, wearing a mask and gloves, was setting up lights as quickly as he could, while Freya was scrambling to assist him. Dana pulled up the bike alongside the tent and shouted through the plastic wall. All clear. They're well away from here. Dean followed. How's Suresh? It's more than burns. There's a lot of shrapnel damage too, Morris reported, hands working nimbly in the patient's chest cavity. My guess is they were trying to burn him out of his rig and the flames hit something that went boom. He's got damage to his lung, his chest, his spine. Part of his aorta is missing. Morris looked up at them. Dean, do you have a handheld 3D scanner on your rig? Sure, for design modeling. Go get it, wipe it down thoroughly in alcohol. This man needs a graft fast, and I don't have a portable MRI. Ooh, a footnote. Portable MRI machines have been cleared by the FDA as of 2020. As yet, there are no handheld options. It's not relevant to the plot beyond this scene, so I figured that was close enough. That is something I would love to look at. I didn't know we had made enough progress on, like, miniaturizing that scale of magnetism to produce a portable MRI. Furthermore, like, you'd have to have a lot of user feedback for a handheld MRI scanner. Because if you think about it, right, like an MRI rotates around a person and scans the way that the changing magnetic fields interact with stuff in the body, and that's how it gets that information, right? So you would have to have like an an oscillating tubular magnetic field, and you would have to like have specific points that you're trained to hold it at, or like it makes noises as it approaches that point where it should be held, and then it gets the information. It goes doo dee doo dee doo dee doo dee 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 as soon as you're in the next right spot, and it, you know what I mean? It would have to like there'd have to be like probably a good mixture of feedback and training. Again, I'm not like, a medical engineer, so who knows? I could be completely wrong that it has to work that way. But, it could be. It's not unsurprising if we get to the point of portable. I think more the a handheld MRI, uh, probably the limitation is the ability to use it, is my thought. Anyway, Dean nodded. I'll get it, but my printer isn't medical grade. There's a medical freehold about 80 kicks southwest of here. If I can send them the accurate model, they can print the graft and deliver it here by high-speed drone. I'll also need a tank of anesthetic. I need gas. Injecting a sedative is too iffy with this many holes in him. Everybody move, Morris said crisply. Everyone snapped to work. Dana couldn't help the proud smile. She'd never seen Morris in an operating room before, and it was an impressive sight. Ooh, printable graft had a footnote on it, by the way. As of 2020, 3D printed organ transplants have been successful, has had 3D printing of biotissues. This serves as proof of concept on being able to do both. Several researchers are striving toward 3D printing human organs. I I knew we had managed to 3D print organ tissue. I didn't know we actually managed to like print full structural organs. That's interesting. That's gone farther in the past couple of years while I wasn't paying attention. That's neat. Morris had used the scanner to make an approximate model of Suresh's injuries. Dean had transmitted the 3D image to someone who could do something with it, and a large cargo drone flew their way. Ooh, cargo drone has a footnote. Fast delivery drones are in use in rural areas. Companies such as Amazon, UPS, and Walmart are all investing in expansion of the concept. As of 2020, the hardest part is perfecting larger cargo delivery and getting FAA approval. Yeah, there are designs, even like schematics for large cargo drones. It's just a matter of like making them worth it to use in a capitalistic system. You know, like that much battery mass and having to charge them and like all the R&D work. It's expensive and these drones are very situational, so it probably is unlikely to make a lot of money until it's really really well tested and everything. So, you know, unshocking that they're considering like medical cargo drones feasible here. Anyway, speaking of the medical cargo drones, get back to the story we're telling. Really taking the tension out of it talking about this. But that's what I get for clicking the footnote. Anyhow, Dana had gone to meet it as it landed, and the sealed cooler and anesthetic tank detached quickly. She collected the precious cargo and waved to the drone's camera as it lifted back into the sky. She hurried back to the operating room and scrubbed her hands quickly, bringing the box inside the tent. Morris let out a harsh breath in relief. Thank God. Any longer and we'd have lost him. Remind me to send a thank you to the folks at your medical outpost. They had a graft designed, printed, and delivered in under an hour. Well, it's what they do, Morris agreed without looking up. Actually, if it's safe enough to send longer range transmissions, I'd like to get them online. Is this more of Morris's dialogue? Ah, yeah, this is more of Morris's dialogue. Actually, if it's safe enough to send longer range transmissions, I'd like to get them online. Freya's been trained as a medic, but that's not surgical training, and I've had 2 drinks tonight. I could use an assist. Dean pulled out his device. What's their encryption patch? Updated 4 days ago, I believe. That's not as recent as I'd like. The Veretti twins clearly didn't overhear our comms conversation when we got here, but they found the mine somehow. Freya looked through the plastic wall at Dean. Suresh was in and out of it before Morris started operating. He said they worked him over pretty bad, but they had pointed questions about Project 451. She looked pointedly at him. They called it the repository. They called it by name. Morris cleared his throat loudly. That's for later. Right now, dial the doctor, yes or no. Dana was feeling her stomach churn at the blood all over Morris's gloves. Whatever was wrong with Suresh, it was making him bleed profusely, and her brother agreed. We'll place the call for you, he said shortly, but it was clear he was thinking about something else. Suresh started moving, his breathing thick and wet, and he started to howl in pain. Hide, he rasped, raving in agony. Hide the... Get that anesthetic over here. Keep him unconscious. Dana scrambled to obey. She found the mask and brought it up towards him when Suresh suddenly grabbed her wrist, crazed. It's in my sack, he shouted at her, pain and fear warring. Dana felt paralyzed by his gaze. Morris reached over and grabbed the mask from her hand as Suresh pushed her hands toward his feet. Get it! Automatically, Dana obeyed, feeling around Suresh's ankle. Her fingers found a data card hidden in his sock. It was as blood-stained as the rest of him, but intact. Morris saw it but didn't care, covering Suresh's face, feeding him the sedative. Tell her, Suresh rasped as his head fell back. They didn't get it. Dana stuck the data card in her pocket and collected the screen with a whole team of doctors on the other end of the comm. She scrubbed carefully and took the device into the operating tent. Point that camera at the gory stuff, Morris told Dana. Dana did so, but looked for Dean over her shoulder while Morris continued to work. Dean was in his rig, apparently talking to Banner. She couldn't make it out, but apparently they were having a huge argument about something. Enough that Freya looked ready to march out of the tent and join the fray. Morris's colleagues watched the operation virtually and offered feedback on the procedures. After another hour, Morris declared the operation over and sewed Suresh up again. Dana's knees were shaking from the whole experience. Nothing relates in the city relates to my life now. Morris let out a breath between his teeth and rolled his neck painfully. Done. He needs to rest. Do we have the painkillers? For him or for us? What was I thinking getting medical training? Freya groaned. Morris took it in stride, chuckling. The way we're trained in town, we don't get tired until a full 24 hours of surgery have gone by. You might lose your last patient or two, but that's how they keep the costs down on medical staff. He led the way into Freya's rig and washed his hands. Listen, Dean, as a doctor, I don't get to talk about my patients' personal lives with people, but I am allowed to take action that'll prevent further loss of life. So I know about the Veretti twins. They were iced ages ago. Where did they get a Fringer vehicle? Presumably from the Fringers? And they're not noted for being generous with their toys, Dean. If they're giving anything to anyone, it's for a reason. What's going on? What's a repository? All right. I'll tell you everything. Miles away, Banner made another encrypted call. Yenna, I'm at the Outback Ridge. There's been another strike. We can quite decisively cross Suresh off our suspect list. I've been informed that the Veretti twins were active this week using a Fringer vehicle as transport. My God, Yenna breathed. You were right then? The city has operatives in Arcadia? The twins? They couldn't plan a straight line with a ruler. They're working for someone. My efforts to find any Fringer agents among the ranks are underway. I've been able to clear 5 out of 9 people on my suspect list. Still looking forward to finding out what that test is. I hate to give the impression I don't trust you, Banner, but at some point I'll want a full report. Yet I didn't call to tell you I hadn't found anything yet. I've been going over the list of places that have been hit. There's no common thread in terms of population, priority, or common visitors. There is, however, a common project. I think the city is targeting Project 451. Yenna looked at him sharply. How do they even know about that? I don't know, but Suresh knew about it. The Verettis were willing to beat him to death to learn more. Yenna was silent for a moment. If 451 is making our people a target... Return to headquarters. I want a full report on your investigation. We'll take a vote on whether or not to continue with the plan. Ooh, things are happening. See, I have a guess as to what the repository is, right? Just based on the way they've been talking about it and like what it is, the little canister and what I would do in this situation and probably honestly some half remembered information from Miles Past Xanadu, the short story this is based on. I have a good sense of what this is, especially with a name like the repository. But let's keep reading and find out, shall we? Ugh. Chapter 8. Dana felt her heartbeat tick up as they sat at the table in Freya's rig. She had known there were things she wasn't being told, but that was typical to her way of thinking. She'd known that her brother was involved with whatever made Crawley nervous enough to approach her directly. She was finally going to get an answer. Dana, you've been wondering who taught me as a wheeler, Dean began his explanation. The answer is a lot of people. You've been undergoing the same training. Some of it from me, some of it from Freya, some from all the others you've met on her run. Most of the information is pre-collapse. It's simply being used to a greater extent than ever before. Dean, none of this information is available now. Maybe it's something people knew before, but they're all claimed ideas. No, not just claimed, forgotten. During the collapse, most of the world's databases were damaged, or at least cut off when the power stopped. People who knew things died by disaster or attrition. Lines of communication between continents are still spotty. The result? The information that survived is all kept away from people who can't pay. And with costs of living high enough, well, nobody goes looking for it. Who has money to waste on something that might not be valuable? It's not that big a leap, Freya offered. Higher education was limited to people with money, even back before, but they had the information available, even if they weren't trained in it. They just took something prohibitively expensive and made it even more exclusive. Something they won't tell you at home. The very first wheelers were prison work parties from the city, Dean said, nodding at Dana's stunned look. That was just the start of it. Along the way, we've adapted to circumstances and even improved on much. We've got something the city never had before. People are willing to share information and share it freely. There's no profit in hiding it, and quality of life increases across the board when more people use the things we've learned, Freya put in. So one day, Dean went to our leadership and proposed a new strategy. Make all our intellectual resources available to the people of the city. Dean, if the city's already making attack runs on Arcadian children, is it a really good idea to assist them? Not to the fringers, not to the chancellorship, to give to everyone else, Freya explained. To be clear, the city has a lot of this information already. They simply just don't use it. How can you know that? Dana demanded before she froze and turned slowly to Morris. You're from the gold sector. Is this information available? For those who bother to look, probably. The argument would be that changing our current systems would be more costly than the improvements are worth. Not to the people going hungry. There's got to be a better reason than that. Why? Morris asked, genuinely curious. Dean moved them along. When Sushan started out on her own, she had to improvise almost everything, he said, and his tone was flat out reverent. She was the one who saw the dead places wiped out by collapse and saw what the world could be. The city exiled her, but they couldn't take the brain from her head. From refuse and scraps, she made food and water. She was the one that taught the first work parties that they didn't have to go back. He realized how caught up he was getting, like he was telling a folk tale about a legend. So it's been done before. Even if the city won't put resources into the work, all it takes is people being taught how. To that end, Dean suggested Project 451, a complete database of how we can produce food and water and clothing and power, along with step-by-step instructions on how to do the work safely. Also included are testimonies and pictures taken by former statics like me. Back in town, they're told there's nothing out here but roving gangs of cannibals. Well, nobody who matters believes that. But even so, most people believe what they're told, Freya explained. The repository is a database of everything they would need to know to either escape the city safely or even recreate some of our work at home. Enough to improve their means, or at least to take away the fear of things being done differently. Dana, I told you that people who try their luck and flee the city often don't make it to any of the wheelers before thirst gets them. Imagine how the city would be different if people didn't have to come out past the red line if they wanted to eat real food. There was silence as Dana tried to picture the city and the valley together in her head and couldn't make them fit. The trees in amongst walls of concrete, the condensers trickling water into people's laps. Or taps, rather. The 3D printers churning out parts while Fringer vans went rolling past, broadcasting warnings about claimed idea violations. Dean, what you're trying to do is change the whole city. The city is not welcome to that change. Given how things are exploding, that much is pretty clear to us, Freya said, lightly. Dana said nothing for a moment, trying to imagine what would happen. She hadn't even noticed it, but she'd been using more of her imagination since leaving the city. Life at the worker level was practically by rote, and it was exhausting enough that there was little time for creativity. Hey, Alternate. So you missed, someone's wheeler rig getting firebombed and the Morris, the doctor, got a medical alert on his device and had to go help this guy, only to find that this guy had been intentionally firebombed by two hired peons from the city. So these two guys, the Valeri twins, they essentially they were kicked out for like a violent crime of some kind. I think it was an assault, and the city eventually approached them and was like, "Hey, if you can get information about this secret project that the Wheelers are planning, we will reward you handsomely." And so they were beating up this Wheeler for information. But thankfully, the Wheeler did not give out any information in regards to this project that we're now reading about right now. Project 451, better known as the repository to the people who are working on it. It's essentially a repository of how to live like a Wheeler rather than having to live by the rules of the city. A little time for creativity, that's where I was. Dean, why keep it a secret? I mean, everyone you trust appears to be making contributions anyway. The people who are in. She caught herself, still forbidden to speak of some locations and names in front of Morris. In your bases and projects, they all know. Why are you trying to hide it from the city? If they knew what you were trying to send them, wouldn't it be easier? Easier? Freya repeated. Dana, of all the static things you've said since you got out here, that has to be the most crazy, naive line of the lot. The Fringers are trying to find out where that launch came from because they think it's an attack, Dana insisted. They're freaking out because it glided right past the sort of defenses the city has. Freya talked me past the windbreaker guards with a few of her strawberries. If you showed up with a basket of fruit, let alone all the other miraculous stuff out here, you could ask for things in return. Like a complete change in their entire economy. They've blown up a third of the places that are directly involved in the repository construction. How they're finding it, we don't know, but the rest of the people involved in Project 451 are all in danger. If we can get the thing launched, then it won't matter, Freya summed up. The work will be done. Dana felt the contradictions hit her again from three different directions and struggled to find words. They were freaking out on the news because you got past the walls without warning. If that first weather balloon was carrying a contagion or a bomb, they never would have been ready for it. If they knew it was carrying a library, they'd. She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Excuse me for a moment. Yeah, Agnes, what's up? Hi, I'm reading. Do you want to come over here and speak your piece on the internet? Yeah, hi. Hello. Tap, tap, tap. Yeah, hi. Thank you for using your beans instead of your claws. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Can we see Magnus on camera, actually? That's a good question. Can you guys see him? Ah, you can sort of see him. You can see where he should be when I pet him. Hi, buddy. He just gave me a little bit. I was just sitting here reading and I got the little tiniest, like, teet, teet, teet. With his little beans. Yeah. Oh, nobody pay attention to baby kitty. Yeah, how about we lie down? I'll pet you later. I gotta read for the internets. Hmm? Stay put. Dad loves you. But you know, I can't reach over there and read at the same time. We've had this conversation before. Well, we've had this conversation about work and reaching for kitty at the same time. See, the thing is, I could pet him if I advanced the page with my left hand. Yeah, hi. Yes, hello. Hello, kitty. See, the problem is, I could pet him like this, right? And still read the book, but then I can't pay attention to Kitty Cat, and he's going to get all bent out of he's slowly going to get bent out of shape because he's going to get overstimulated. And I won't be able to see that because I'll be reading. And so eventually he'll turn around and go, "Ah!" in the middle of my sentence. So you just gotta stay put, okay? If you want pets, you gotta come sit on my lap so I can pay attention to you while I'm reading. Huh? He's like, oh. I don't want to sit on lap. That's what I thought, Keter. Pets later. Anyway, where was I? Weather balloon. Hi. Maybe you do want lap time. Come on. Over here. You can do it. Hi. Hello. Yes. Hi. Yeah. Thank you for Bonk. Look at this little sweetheart. What a sweet little baby. Aw. What do you think, Mr. Man? But you gotta come sit on my lap if you want. I know, I love you too, Bonk. Buddy, I gotta read. Yeah, hi. Yeah, you have gotten my attention. You have successfully gotten my attention. Okay. Now I know you don't like to be picked up. Come here. It's okay. Shh. It's alright. We can sit right here and we can read together. Huh, kitty? How does that sound? Anyway, we were in the middle of a very tense scene when I was tapped on the elbow there. It's okay. Oh, well, nope. I tried. They what? What would they do? You said yourself, the stuff that you've written in your journal, it's worth dozens of infringements alone. He pointed at her colorful outfit. You walk down the street wearing that, the fringers would be all over you. I know, but if they knew the next balloon wasn't going to blow things up or hurt anyone, they wouldn't be making attack runs on people out here. The blasts are preemptive strikes for an attack that isn't coming. And they were staring at her again like she was a newborn child uttering cuss words she couldn't comprehend. This time she didn't sink into herself, she attacked. No! Quit looking at me like that. If I'm making a fool of myself, tell me how. Freya sighed hard. Dana, if you could take any one thing from this world and give it to the entire city, what would it be? I can only pick one, Dana answered automatically and quickly swept a hand up over her mouth. I mean, Dean pointed at her with a nod. There it is. Of all the things the city does not have, you can't even pick which one matters most. Dana, you've walked in both worlds now. You've seen enough of our life not to be so scared of it. When you first came out here, you were trying madly not to look closely at anything you didn't recognize for fear of what you might see. Dana nodded, conceding that point. The best kept secret in the city is that it's possible to live without them. You think that if the Fringers knew we were offering a textbook on how, that they'd be fine with it? No. My old job on a packing line, they search us for recording devices 3 times a day because they don't dare share out details on making packing materials. That's this kind of I don't even know the term. Open source, Freya supplied. Everyone gets the blueprints. People can add or subtract their own adjustments as needed. Back in the city, it's illegal to try. You think the escalating attacks are a preemptive strike? They're trying to kill the message. They don't even admit the messengers exist out here. Dana felt her heart crack, though she wasn't quite sure why. But they don't know what you're trying to send over the walls. Her voice was small and scared for some reason, like she was discussing a war being lost. And if they did, would they welcome it? There's gotta be a reason. There was a long, heavy silence at this, and Dana felt Morris holding her hand. She squeezed his fingers automatically, grateful for the company. It was the first time Dana hadn't been the only one to learn something new. In her time with the Wheelers, she'd always been the odd one out, being taught like a schoolgirl. For once, Morris was with her, also getting new information. Marco chose that moment to stick his head into the room. He's awake again. Morris jumped up, and Dana released his hand, bringing the little conference to an end. But when Morris returned to his patient, Dana suddenly remembered the data card. Suresh had this hidden in his sock. He was very determined that I get it to Banner. She held it out to Dean. I don't know what it is. Dean took it, turning it over in his hands. It's not part of the repository. It's a patch. Our network is nothing like the cities, so that they can't launch cyber attacks. The network needs security updates periodically, but a serious patch probably includes all our outposts, freeholds, and projects. Then why did Suresh have it? Freya asked. Doesn't this sort of thing usually come to us? Usually, but either way, it's no wonder he took such a beating to keep it secret. If the city ever got this, they'd have us all at their mercy. Dean gave it back to Dana. Keep this safe. We have to get it back to Banner. Suresh was floating in and out of consciousness for a while. Morris stayed with him to monitor his progress and make him well enough to travel. Dana stayed with Morris, but couldn't offer much except following some basic instructions. In truth, she wanted to sort out her thinking on what she'd learned because she knew Dean would be pushing for her to make some kind of decision. Sure enough, once Suresh stabilized and slept more soundly, Dean came up to join them. So, now you both know the secret. Reactions? I guess I'm a little glad to be in the loop, but I'm actually a little disappointed. I was expecting it to be some grand invasion plan to wipe out the Fringers. That's exactly what it is, Morris told her solemnly as he washed his hands again. It's just not doing so violently. We take the slow and steady route on a lot of our projects, but launching 451 is tomorrow's problem. Today we've got to sort out your patient. Will he be okay? I believe he'll live, but I'd like to get him back to one of the freeholds. The more we move him, the harder his recovery will be at this point. Dean nodded and looked back to the rising smoke. It's cold-blooded, but Wheeler rules say we have to salvage what we can from his wreck. She's a write-off anyway, so he'll need a new one when he recovers. Excuse me, Magnus? Magnus, the press have some questions. Did you get a permit for all that digging you're doing? Mm-hmm. Okay. No responses, by the way. He seems to be entering a bid of no comment. Oh no. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes. Interesting. See, the problem with that plan is if you dig too much, you're gonna wear out your little beans, and then I'm gonna have to pick you up. I'm gonna have to rub little lotion on your beans, and you and I both know that you do not like me touching your beans. So that's why I try to stop you from digging at the food bowl. It's very simple. Poor Magnus. He hears this speech so many times when he digs at the food bowl, but does he take any of it to heart? Precious little of it. Anyway, they're gonna salvage this rig probably. Darcy is sulking because I haven't fed her yet. Oh, Darcy. Poor kitty. Act like the world is ending. Poor small dad, too busy to feed baby. Wimp womp. Magnus just wanted some attention earlier, which I'm very glad he's made progress in using his little peats instead of using his claws to get my attention. That's why there's a bunch of little holes in my shirts right here. I know, withering away, wasted, wasted down to a little thin stick. No foods for baby. Ooh. Magnus and Library are no better, despite the fact that they have like a continuous feeder. They both occasionally look at me like, Dad, it's time to eat. Why are you not eating? Why have we not ate? Yeah. Magnus has learned to not use his claws to get my attention, which I really it's fantastic, honestly. It's a big step forward because he used to bite me to get my attention. I'm like, that doesn't work. Pick a different thing. And then he started poking at me with his claws, and I'm like, please pick a different thing. And so now he's finally figured out that he can just reach out his little beans and go tip tap tip. And then I will be like, huh? Oh. They both know that yelling at me usually does not get my attention because it used to be I had headphones in all the time and they just yelling at me does not do anything with headphones in. So they're both very like physical in getting my attention. Uh, Although Library has figured out that he can yell at Raz, so we've been hearing a lot of Library lately. And like when Magnus says something to me, like he'll vocalize and I'll talk back to him just to like, validate that he's saying things to me so that he can figure out this is the range in which dad can hear. Anyway, I could carry on about my cats a lot, but story. Can we do that? Just build another one for him? Not by ourselves, but we can get at least a few useful parts to contribute when they put another rig together. Dean headed over to the rig. Dana, start making space for salvage, would you? You're asking me? We're already hauling double the cargo we were when I first got here. I'd be amazed if there was any spare room left in your rig. I'll give you a hand, Morris said and followed her. Everyone everyone but the patient was off salvaging the wrecked vehicle, which gave Morris and Dana a little privacy as they started moving things around to make room. Dana had lived on her brother's rig enough to know where more storage units were, and she folded up her own gear to put it all away. She hadn't used anything from the city since before the valley, so the radio dropped out of her bedroll and thunked on the floor. Dana froze. She'd spent so long enjoying the valleys with Dean that she'd honestly forgotten it was there. Morris looked over and saw it before Dana could snatch it up. His face became unreadable as he looked to her in shock. Is is that Fringe your issue? It's fine, she blurted, suddenly talking very fast. They asked me to spy, but I wasn't going to, and I took the battery out right away, and I only kept it because it's illegal to destroy it, and because I'm really sure it can't track a transmitter or any listener or anything. And I took it apart to make sure my brother doesn't know, and I swear I'm not telling anyone who the other people are. Morris put up both hands. Whoa now. Time out. She forced herself to settle. He examined the radio himself and put it back in its hiding place. You're right. I don't believe it can listen or transmit with the power source gone, but it's a 2-second job to put the battery back in. It doesn't look good. I know. Why keep it? I had to, she confessed in a very small voice. When I came out here, it was only to wait a year while my debts were cleared. I had always planned to go back. Morris swiftly understood. And if you don't have that radio with you when you return, it's a punishable offense in the city, isn't it? And once I decided to stay, I had already honestly forgotten it. Are you going to turn me in? As what? You said it yourself. It doesn't look good. Morris took a moment to consider his options and then carefully reached out, laying one hand gently on Dana's neck and the other on her chest just above her breastbone. Oh, so he's measuring her breathing like here-ish. Yeah, I guess that would work. I mean, obviously you can measure pulse here. That's where I tend to measure pulse here. So if you ever need your pulse measured by me, get comfortable with me touching your neck. I'm very bad at pulling a pulse from a wrist. And I always worry that I press too hard on a wrist and get my pulse from my thumb instead. So I'm very used to getting pulse this way. Anyway, she felt her face flush brightly. What are you doing? Measuring your pulse and your breathing. This just became a medical examination. I'm not allowed to break the confidence of my patients, so everything I learn here just became privileged information. Dana burst out laughing, her face flushing further. I'd hate to think what my heart rate must be. It's high, he agreed with a smile. She stared up at him for a long moment before she brought her hands up to him to take him by the collar and pull him in a lot closer, kissing him soundly. When they parted, she smirked. You're not supposed to do that with patients either, are you? No, but I think your checkup is over. But you still have your hands on me, she returned playfully. You know, it feels like a week ago, but before we got that SOS, I was having a really good night. A great night, even. Me too, he responded, pulling her in for an even more heated kiss, which she happily returned. They broke apart to find Freya had returned to the rig with a basket of salvaged parts. Before your brother comes in and finds you two playing doctor, can we finish picking apart the remnants of your patient's home? Freya said with friendly menace. The moment was well and truly over, but Dana still looked pretty pleased with herself. Morris squeezed her hand and returned to his patient, and Freya kept her look of mock maternal disapproval until he left, before giving Dana an impressed thumbs up once he was out of view. Flushing a bit, Dana went back to work, making room for salvage and hiding the radio again. Morris had declared the wounded man shouldn't be moved much, and Dean helped him secure the tent into a more useful shelter. Freya had opened a comm line with the nearest freeholders and called for the Wheelers to send someone who could give him a much smoother ride than the rig they had. As much as Dana wanted to stay with Morris, she knew she'd just be in the way. Dean and Freya were heading back to the valley, and Dana had to go with them. She hadn't told Morris much about the Valley project, and he hadn't asked, to be fair. As much as she might be an outsider to the Wheeler life, she knew she was seeing a lot more of the world than anyone else from the city would, so she was willing to play by their rules. Let me check something real quick. Where are we? We're in the middle of chapter 9. So then there are footnotes. So we have, yeah, we're in the middle of chapter 8, and then we have 9, 10, and 11 in an epilogue. And then the footnotes come in, I think is what's going on there. Duly noted. We could make it, depending on how long the footnotes are, actually, or if those numbers after the main chapters are a second act or something. Who knows? We'll find out. Where was I? Just be in the way. Dean and Freya were heading back to the valley. Yeah, play by the rules. That's where we were. The minute Morris and the shelter were out of sight, Dana felt ready to collapse. Between the endorphin rush of the concert and the adrenaline high of what followed, she hadn't slept in more than a day, and she was nearly dead on her feet. Dean's hammock had never looked so inviting, and she slept on the way. Learning about the repository had answered a lot of her questions. It had neatly solved any lingering worries about a possible planned attack on the city. Dana had no qualms about keeping what she'd seen a secret from the Fringers. She thought of what might happen if the valleys were found, and knew that she'd take that secret to her grave. By nightfall, she wondered if she'd had the chance. Also, you know how I was like, oh yeah, well, if they have the schematics, they could build a sewing machine. The schematics were almost certainly lost, based on the description they gave of, like, post post climate disaster world losing a ton of information, or like finding a ton of information sequestered. They do not have the information to build a sewing machine, which, if you think about it, like, 3D printing parts for like an old style Singer sewing machine has not become popular in our day and age. So like, that's the type of thing. And like, a lot of those manuals would have been paper only manuals, and a lot of that information clearly disappeared in the process of the climate collapse. And it sounds like a good deal of their digital information also had struggled to continue to exist. So they're like, I'm like, why are they hand sewing this big of a thing? Because they don't know how to make a sewing machine. Like, it wouldn't be too hard to intuit, but building a reliable, consistent sewing machine is still a very difficult task if you're working from scratch. It would take me a lot of tries, for example. And I was unhelped by the fact that I only sort of know what I'm doing in an engineering project, you know? Like, I understand basic, like, you know, cam and follower design and, like, gear ratio and stuff like that, but really I only understand engineering in the sense that you can produce specific, like, the closest I get to engineering is considering what an analog type of circuit would be to produce certain logic that I'm used to making with a computer, right? Like, oh yeah, these gear ratios calculate math, or like these two cam and followers make it write a specific signature, or like that kind of thing. I'm not a great engineer. I'm not trained. So, like, it's not a shock that they may have lost the concept of a sewing machine. And ostensibly, if you think about it, like, a sewing machine in and of itself in a society that's allowed to be taking it as slow as the Wheelers, uh, do manage to do things, hand sewing would probably be plenty for a lot of things. Like, you don't. A sewing machine is a convenience rather than a necessity, especially if you are not mass manufacturing clothing. You know what I mean? Anyway, I digress. Not to mention the fact that you can, like, technically 3D print certain fabrics, especially if you have, like, a really high quality 3D printer that can do a lot of really high detail. You could 3D print of, like, a t-shirt, basically, without having to deal with, like, the difficulties of, like, a modern loom and, like, hand sewing and everything. But anyway, I could carry on. I might when we're done with this book. I digress. Dana woke up from a doze and found the rig had stopped moving. She rolled out of the hammock and went up to the driver's seat to find the doors were open. Her brother was in front of the rig, looking into the distance with his scope. Freya was Freya was with him, also looking ahead. They both looked quietly furious. Dana stepped down from the rig to join them, and Dean handed her the scope without a word, turning her head slightly to point the viewer toward the mountains. Dana looked and felt herself go cold for a moment. More attack drones? We've counted a whole squadron, Freya nodded. Casualties? Dana felt sick. No, 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 no attack. They were able to pull the kites in before the drone could track them back to the source. They haven't found the valley. But they're searching. The Valley Project is hidden by the mountain ranges. If the drones go much lower, they'll lose the signal from their base. That roof is camouflaged for a reason. A pilot would be able to find them, but they don't send flesh and blood people out this far, Freya added. They haven't for more than a generation. Why would they even want to attack? Dana demanded. What's even the point of violence at all? There's no... That valley wasn't putting anyone in danger. Neither was the salt mine. They don't even use that mine in the cities. They harvest salt from the ocean. She shook her head helplessly. Why any of this? What are they afraid of? The future. Banner was their next call. The video conference made his worry clear. There have been patrols in that area before. Their valley aimed to be self-sufficient for exactly that reason. Did you manage to deliver your cargo to them? The metal? As soon as we arrived. We've been helping them out since they got a food shipment together, but we've had to leave to answer that SOS. We don't have the complete shipment of seeds, and it looks like we won't be able to get in there again for a while. How much did you get? About half of what we ordered. Another delay. Those seeds were meant for your next destination. He doesn't want to say where we were going over the comms. Will the valley be all right? On the screen, Banner reacted to the question. He was surprised at her concern. The Valley Project has been successful. Turns out new seeds and saplings to plant all the time, to say nothing of food. We plan to make that Valley Project a full colony in the network like Xanadu Station, but of course their energy resources are limited if they can't have those turbines running full time. And their viability as a colony is questionable if the city keeps patrolling the mountains. So what do we do? Wherever those seeds were going, well, they'll only have half to work with, plus whatever they were trading for, which means changing the schedule dramatically with capacities all different now. On the screen, Banner's face changed. You may have to finish that run yourself. Dean sighed, a little annoyed. Dana, he doesn't want to make further plans with you listening. Give us some room? Dana did so, turning to leave the rig before turning back. Oh, before I forget, she called to Banner, drawing the data card out. Suresh gave me this. He was very determined that it not be lost. He wanted me to give it to you. Banner's face changed when he saw the card in her hand. You haven't used it? None of us have it. Looks like a security patch. How do we get it to you? Banner's eyes changed like he just noticed something. You don't. I have other copies. Destroy that one immediately. Dana held it up to the camera and let Banner watch as she snapped it in half. Banner never took his eyes off her, as though he was seeing her for the first time. What have I missed there? Dana wondered, stepping off the rig and shutting the door behind her. Marco joined her a moment later. I'm still an apprentice. I'm not cleared for everything either. They figure the more I know, the less options they have if I decide to make trouble later. I know Banner, Marco said quietly. He saved my dad's life once. At her look of surprise, he nodded. Life out past the red line isn't just us. Before I was born, there were other gangs raiding freeholds for more food and water. Banner lost his family to one of those raids. Dana froze, remembering the story Freya had told her in the scrapyard. Really? His whole family? Banner was a regular wheeler then. He set up patrols and watchmen. When he identified one of the gang, he worked for 6 months to find their base. Took him a week longer to figure out their hunting trails, but he played the gangs against each other like a chess game, moved our people out of their way. He wiped them out without a shot being fired from Arcadians. The city keeps driving its own people out with hunger. The Banner's the reason we don't worry when they find us. Dana nodded slowly. Well, I'll be honest with you, kid. I feel like I slipped on something and landed in the middle of a whole other universe. When I first came out here, I was scared to death of everything new. And now? Less scared, more frustrated. I feel like I'm putting a puzzle together and nobody will tell me what the picture's meant to be. She waved back toward her brother. I thought the secret was Project 451, but that's only part of it. They have to keep so much hidden because anytime they make it obvious, the buzzard drone starts circling. I get that feeling all the time. My mom kept telling me I'd understand when I was older. I'm starting to think adults don't have a clue what they're doing or why they do it. Dana laughed despite herself. That's all human history in 10 words or less. Then the door opened up, and Dean stepped out with a map on a screen. All right, we've been ordered to complete the supply run taking the seeds to the coast. As a rule, the wheelers only know their own routes, but with the valley locked down and the scrapyard wrecked, we have to go further. Only a few rigs were outside the valleys when the drones arrived, so it has to be us. Freya grinned at Marco. You're getting more from your apprenticeship than any other kid your age. Dana just shook her head. Every step took them further past the red line. Banner's okay with me seeing more? Apparently, you're the lesser of evils. As they boarded the rig, Dana's device buzzed and she took a look. Message from Morris. Suresh didn't make it. Heavy silence. There was nothing more to say, but Dean shifted the rig into gear and got them moving again. She looked back at the mountains, mournful. Finally I had somewhere I wanted to stay. Banner had left his call with Dean and reconnected with Coca, one of his most trusted people, as his team went to collect their prisoners. Coca, I want you to record the interrogation. The Veretti twins are our first real lead. We've been chasing ghosts for the last... The Veretti twins are dead, Coca said. Dead? Opened up the holding cell and they were already gone. From the look of them, I'd say it happened within an hour of their capture. Suicide? Hard to tell. There's not a mark on them, but the discoloration of their skin suggests poison or suffocation, his lieutenant said. One thing I can confirm, the door wasn't tampered with. There's no sign of anyone else getting there before us, so there's nobody else who could have really done it. Banner was stunned, but trying not to show it. I've been speaking to all the people who knew them before they were exiled. They all agree. The twins aren't smart enough to be masterminds and aren't ambitious enough to be really dangerous. These guys weren't true believers. What could make guys like this determined enough to take their secrets with them before questioning? Unless they didn't take their own lives. Who could have beaten us here? Banner was unreadable. Our best chemical lab's on the Valdez, right? He asked, already knowing the answer. I need a secure call between their laboratory and a medical outpost. I need someone to walk me through how to take tissue samples. Banner's voice puts a little more strain than I expect on my throat every time I need to start talking as him. I have no idea how types who do like that gravel voice for like full characters, like take David Hayter as Snake. really spending a lot of time down here. It really asks a lot of your throat. I guess you get used to it over time, but still. Um, yeah, let's dive into chapter 9. We've got time for that. Let's get one more last drink of water, and then we'll continue. Chapter 9. They drove for another 2 days, and the rains came. The hammering on the roof of the rig was like a chorus of hammers on metal, drumming and drumming without pause. Dana took the wheel now and then, while her brother slept and felt the ground changing below their wheels as the hard pan became waterlogged. Dean put out catchments wherever they stopped. There were wild grasses growing here, and little islands of solid ground held together by the roots of the plants. The rain formed puddles, and then low rivers. Dana felt the ground change again, and realized they were driving over concrete, broken up and taken apart. If it had rained like this during the heat waves, would it cool us down, or would the heat turn the world into a sauna? She wondered. The wind is fierce. Does the rain make the wind stronger, or does the wind make the rain colder? Dean, we gotta shift gears here, Freya called from the other rig. Hardpan won't absorb a lot of water. This is getting to flood watch levels. I know, Dean called back. I'm watching the gradient overlays on my map. There's not a lot in the way of high ground here, but we should make the next charging station at least. When they stopped to charge again, they stayed in the rigs, Dean and Freya leaning hard, power marching. Dean and Freya leaning hard, power marching against the wind as they ran the charging cables. Dana looked at the solar tree and realized why they'd been made out of metal. Up above, she could see a part of the structure turning and realized it was a turbine as well, if not an obvious one. Dean hit the shutters as soon as he came back in, and the rig sealed up. Dana had thought the shutters were just for mosquito clouds, but she was grateful to be more fortified. The rig rocked a little against the wind, and Dana shuddered, grateful to be indoors. I've never been out in the open during a gale like this. Dean nodded. Storms are nature's way of settling an imbalance, like when you toss a rock into a puddle. The ripples are huge, but they spread out far enough that the water is settled again. Storms are how the atmosphere balances the equation. They're still raging after the collapse, but one day they'll finally settle down. Might take another lifetime, but eventually it'll happen. Dean's device chimed a weather alert. He checked it quickly. Hail's moving in. It's gonna get a lot worse. Dana was trying very hard not to lose it once they battened down. They'd used the cables again, detaching the solar panels and stowing them under the rigs, keeping them covered. The first hailstone hit the shutters. And it sounded like a sledgehammer blow. Dana jumped with a squawk, and then another hit, and another, then 50, then thousands, so many that she couldn't tell them apart. The comm crackled. Dean, we're coming in. Dean swore and opened the door. A wave of cold air came sweeping in. Dana reared back automatically, and Marco came running, with Freya on his heels. They were holding something over their heads to keep the hail off, but Freya looked beaten black and blue, limping and bloodied from even a minute outside. Dean slammed the door behind them, Freya gasping in pain. Dean led her gently to the hammock and started tending to her injuries, face full of worry. Dana swallowed her concern and gestured for Marco to follow her. Marco's printed arm was mangled. The boy had a few bruises of his own, but looked more angry than hurt. She covered me, he hissed, frustration pouring out of him. Couldn't even reach the scrap metal we were using for cover. He was blaming himself, and she tried to distract him. Let me see if I can fix that arm. You might have to talk me through it. She looked back at Dean and Freya. Freya was a bruised mass of contusions, Dean wiping down her face gently and checking her vitals. The worry on his face was like a living thing as he tended to her, and Dana felt a spike. He loves her so much. What happened? Hail busted one of our wheels. The rig tilted, the shutters got bent inward enough to shatter the windows, and the space over the driver's seat got torn open. We couldn't stay there. He looked haunted for a moment. We were outside for 20 seconds, if that. That hail's bigger than my fist. Dana dug out the toolkit. Well, assuming the hail doesn't just trash both rigs, we're gonna need to make some repairs. And I don't just mean your hand. Dean fretted over Freya's bruises until the hail passed. Marco sent up one of his comm drones to relay a stronger signal. They got into contact with Morris, using the comm to show him Freya's bruises and answer his questions. While Dean and Freya consulted the doctor, Dana was in the workshop trying to fix Marco's hand. The mechanism isn't complicated. Excuse me. The mechanism isn't complicated, just small scale. The boy walked her through it. Dana fiddled with a pair of tweezers, trying to thread artificial tendons around artificial joints. The casing is so elaborate, like it was made by an artist more than a mechanic. My mama taught me nothing's finished until it's beautiful, Marco said softly, not distracting her. Freya says your first impression of our life was the junkyard. You thought we were savages picking through refuse. He looked up at her. You still think so? No. I thought your way of life was messy and dirty and made of junk that barely held together. I was wrong. It's not chaos. I don't even know the word. It's individual. It's made by everyone. Marco nodded. That goes for everything. Food, clothing, home. We can conjure it from scraps, but we have to live with it every day. He flexed his hand, and two of the fingers worked as if to make his point. So shouldn't they be beautiful too? Dana didn't look up from her task. When she'd first made something functional in the valleys, she felt like she'd discovered fire. But she saw Marco next to the work table and suddenly realized they did not go together at all. Marco was dressed artistically, too. She thought it was just patchwork, everything thrown together in whatever way covered him from the dust, but trying to view things aesthetically, she suddenly saw that he'd already done it to himself. Marco, you made that outfit, didn't you? It wasn't something your mother stitched together. He nodded, and she was awed. You've only got fingers on one hand. How do you sew? 5 fingers, 10 toes, 20 teeth. Mom said one imagination makes many tools. The boy shrugged like it was no big deal. There's ways. Yeah, off the top of my head, like, I wouldn't be able to sew as fast if I lost one of my hands, but, you can figure it out. And I mean, like, it sounds like he has, you wouldn't need dexterity to brace the fabric while you're sewing if you're doing, like, running stitches and the like. There are adaptive techniques for sure, off the top of my head. Or like, for example, if he was like knitting or crocheting, like crocheting in particular, you could just have like the hand set at a specific position and have it managing the tension of the yarn, and like you can definitely get a sense of how tense the yarn is, for example. My point is this is not unrealistic. This didn't necessarily need a footnote, as evidenced by the lack of footnote in the book, but trust me when I say people who are disabled find a way to make it work. uh, it's not always intuitive to the average abled person's eye, and it might be a little slower, but they figure it out. People are clever. People have always been smart. It's just a matter of what you have on hand. Speaking of, while I'm off topic here, um, them talking about like, oh yeah, the like rubberized tendons and like the way that this prosthetic is described, it is not how I was picturing it initially. But like, I was picturing like as soon as they were like, oh yeah, it's super intricate. I was picturing there's this guy. I wish I could remember his name, but he's essentially like rigged up a set of mechanical fingers that like sit at the end of a mechanical forearm, right? And based on certain flexion that he makes with this part of his arm, he can engage or disengage a series of catches and make a series of motions to engage and disengage certain fingers. So, like, they're all geared, right? And so he has 5 fingers here. And so he can, like, say, hold the hand at a specific angle and flex some specific muscle to hit key A, let's say, and then that disengages the motion of these 2 fingers, and then he can flick the arm down to close these 2 fingers and use the momentum to close the thumb, and then unpress that catchment, and then these 2 fingers are out of sync from the other three mechanically. Like, it's crazy. Check out the Discord for more on that. If I can find this guy's page, because I've seen it a few times, if I can find this guy's page, come check out the Discord. I will link this in either the info dump uh, or the promotional section of the Discord, because this is really cool, and it's what I was picturing for this guy's arm. But as it's described as having like rubberized tendons and stuff, it works on a different mechanism clearly. Although, which it kind of makes sense for it to work on a different mechanism, because like it's kind of been implied that like a lot of like gear making and like that type of thing might be not as common. So like it's just interesting. Like the way that this prosthetic is implied to work, it sounds very fascinating to me. And that's the thing about like truly good prosthetic design, is it is directly influenced by the person that's going to be wearing it. Like, if I were to lose one of my leg would be built in a completely different fashion to someone else, because I would need specific things, not only for the interface to my body, but also the needs that I ask of that given limb. Like, if I were to lose one of my hands, first of all, that would be a incredibly annoying adjustment for me to make. But secondly, I would need something very, very different from a prosthetic arm than the average person would need. You know, like I type all day and I speak with my voice all day. Like, well, I don't speak with my voice all day, but like you guys know, I speak to camera a lot, and like I would need something very different if I were to lose this arm in comparison to this arm, right and left for the podcast listener. You know, it's just very interesting to me, and especially in a society like the Wheelers, where like people are willing to take the time to work out that kind of thing. I'm sure prosthetic design is very fascinating in this world, because they are willing to really dial in like, what do you need from this arm, and like what can we incorporate, and like can you have multiple types of arms to do specific sets of things, because that's another really common thing when it comes to replacing arms in particular. Like, there are arms designed to be grippers, there are arms designed to be like manipulation tools, like it's a whole thing. Anyway, my point is that this is really cool, and it's making me think real hard about what this is. Anyway, back to the book. It was at that moment when Dean came over to them carrying the screen still open to Morris. "He wants to talk to you." She took the comm, smiling. "Hey, you." "Hi," he said warmly. "Listen, Freya's going to be fine, but I just got the call. There's an outbreak of Langford's malady in the Central Plains. Just wanted to make sure you were clear of it." "You're the doctor. Aren't you more likely to get infected than me?" "Yep, and I'll have to go into quarantine for a while once I'm done treating people, so I guess I was calling to tell you we won't see each other for a while." Dana actually felt relieved. Her new run with Dean meant she wouldn't actually be able to see Morris again, and she was working up the nerve to tell him so. If he had reasons of his own, she was off the hook. "Well, then we'll have to make sure we're both wait. Well, then we'll have to make sure we're both worth waiting for." She could hear the innocent leer in Morris's voice. "That's what I was hoping for, yes." Hang on a second. I need to look up this Langford's malady. Is this a name of a disease in this setting, or is this an actual, like, is this like an alternative name for something we already know? Langford's malady. No. This does not seem to be. There are a lot of like Langford. Like, if I looked up Langford's malady just directly, there are a lot of Langfords in the news that have maladies occurring to them, but nothing's in specific. So maybe not. My only other thought is like Langford. Langford, like, look up Langford medicine? Because maybe it's like the name of a doctor? Huh. Maybe not. Well, that's something I can dig for, I suppose. Anyway, back on topic. Freya's injuries were ugly, but ruled not serious. She slept to recover, swaying in the hammock. Her rig was under tow, so they were moving slowly. The weather settled as they got closer to the destination. They'd followed the coastline for a while, and Dana could smell salt and rot. She had no idea where they were beyond the direction they were traveling. The rains had moved in, and the map was changing constantly as dust roads turned to quicksand rivers. Powering through the mud would have eaten up a lot more power from the rig, and the constant rain meant the ground was changing constantly. We'll get there, we just have to navigate a little more carefully. Dean was calm and solid again. Dana, would you take my device and add an alert, please? Anyone else knowing this way should know there's problems with the route. Dana did so, having learned the use of their maps, when his comm chimed a notification. Message from someone called Yana? It's marked encrypted. Dean's face changed when he pulled the name. He checked his mirrors automatically and pulled over. I have to take this privately. With all four of them on the one rig, that wasn't easy, so Marco and Dana stepped out of the rig entirely, stretching their legs. Marco clambered up on top of the rig. Look at that! He pointed to the coastline. We're close enough to see the sea farms. Dana froze. You've got a pirate sea farm? Well, it's not mine exactly, but what did you expect? You think the city's farms are this far out? Oh, I have no idea where the city's farms are. They keep the locations of their food production secret for obvious reasons. She was long past being horrified at the infringements and was now more impressed than worried. The familiar face of the old woman with the kindly features and a red hood was waiting when the connection was made. Hello, Dean. Dean found he was smiling back automatically. Yenna had never forgotten a name, no matter how rarely they spoke in person. Hey, boss. I was surprised to get your call. I've been hearing disturbing rumors from your part of the world. Apparently the Fringers are escalating our interest in us. They'd almost have to, since they'd paid us no attention at all, but I agree, things have changed lately. How does this affect Project 451? Yenna asked with unshakable calm. Hasn't changed our timetable thus far, but if it keeps going as it is, we might have trouble making a launch. All the information we need has largely been collected already. Our test launch gave us a few adjustments that needed to be made with the capsule, but our launch site was crawling with fringers within 2 hours. So I've heard. There's been some serious discussion regarding the viability of the project. Dean felt his stomach sink. I see. Dean, the repository was your idea. We agreed to it. It was a good idea. It still is. But recent events are forcing us to re-examine our position. I suggested to the others that we might need the opinion of someone else. Put me on with anyone who has questions. Dean was already pulling up his notes. Engineering, concept, safeguards, I'll tell them everything I can. If only it was that complicated. I've been led to understand that your sister is traveling with you. I'm also told she was ready to make a place for herself on the Valley Project, but the Fringers have the place locked down tight. Yes, Dean said politely. Yena was one of those people you just had to be respectful to, no matter what. Bring her to headquarters. We have questions for her. Dean swallowed automatically. Yena, my sister hasn't been any closer than the Valley. She's not cleared for the Apex projects, let alone HQ. Even now, we're halfway between the Valleys and the Valdez. I know, but your project has given us a special circumstance. I've contacted the Valley and Xanadu. Those that have met your sister consider her not a risk. The nicest thing anyone's ever said about my family, Dean said with forced cheer, though his heart was racing uncontrollably. He heard soft footsteps behind him and glanced over his shoulder. Freya had woken up and rolled out of her hammock painfully. Does my father agree? She asked, wincing painfully. Your father was the swing vote, and to be honest, he said yes because I asked him to, Yana admitted. but I want to hear what she thinks. You understand that if we bring her to you, she'll know, Freya pushed. She'll know how to get there, she'll know who's based there, including you and the rest of the leadership. More than that, she'll be able to figure out the rest. All of Arcadia. I mean, I trust Dean. She's his family, but part of her still wants to go back to the city. That is understood. But times are changing, Yana said. We have to adapt. 451 may be the only way to do so without violence, but I need to be able to convince the others of that. And if your sister is on the fence, well, she may yet be proof of concept. Change of plans, Dean declared as he came out of the rig. Dana could care less. Dean, she pointed out over the water, you've got pirate sea farms. Is there even anyone here? I haven't seen a diver or a boat yet. We've got those farms all up and down the coast. We'd let them grow in between harvest. Dean was unconcerned, still on his own topic. There's been a change of plans. Dana couldn't let it go so easily. You've got that many seaweed farms? They do feed more than half the planet and decarbonize the ocean. They're a huge food resource. They're sustainable, easy to build. We got mouths to feed too, you know. Ooh, seaweed farm footnote. I didn't know you could farm seaweed. I thought it was just like you just kind of like farm seaweed as it naturally occurs. I didn't think you could grow it manually. Anyway, footnote. Seaweed farms are already in operation. More are being set up around the world. Seaweed is edible and grows at incredible speed. Seaweed does for the oceans what forests do for the land. The setup's easy and sustainable. Two words that make it perfect additions to this story. I've had, personally, I think about seaweed and I'm just thinking about like sushi and like rice balls and like dishes where you're like wrapping the seaweed around something or using it to hold something. I wouldn't, and like, eating the seaweed on its own as like a snack. I feel like you could use it for more than that, right? Because, like, if you think about it, carrageenan, right? The ice cream additive that makes it really scoopable and smooth, that comes from seaweed. So clearly you can use it for other stuff. I wonder if it's kind of like a mushroom situation where, like, you could make it into a powder and then that powder is very broadly useful, or like something else along that line. Who knows? It's probably one of those things where like you can use it in a shocking number of places. We just haven't gotten around to it. Speaking on topic of like powders that you use in cooking, I read another story recently where they suggested that we use like insect flour, like in the sense that you take like say a mealworm or something, right? Insects are generally very easy to farm. You feed them compost and that's it, usually. But like, I couldn't eat a dried cricket, right? I just look at that and I'm like, that's a cricket. But if it were like ground into a flour and then used to like make another thing so it's not shaped like a cricket, I think I'd be down. Honestly. Like, use it as a flour in like a Dorito or something. Like something where like you're already adding aggressive or artificially aggressive flavors on top of it, I'd be down to play ball. I just don't think I could eat like crickets or like, isopods broadly directly. Like I already have enough trouble eating a crab or a lobster. And they're like big isopods that you kind of, it's socially accepted to eat right now. So like I don't think I could do crickets directly. Like I'm not about to eat nacho cheese crickets. But if they used it as a flour to make junk food, we might be onto something. Anyway, mouths to feed. Much like the talk in the book, we have also wandered off topic. We're not going to the Valdez. Marco, I'm sorry. I know your father works there, but we've been given new marching orders. Our delivery will be completed by drone. We're heading further along the coast. Dean took a breath. Further than I've ever gone before, to be honest. Why? Marco asked. Dean held out a hand to his sister, and she took it automatically. Dana, you've been asking me for months now what all this is for, what the ultimate goal of all this is. Dean squeezed her fingers a little. You ready to find out? Dana felt her heart give a solid thud. Oh, I'm so ready for that. Dean nodded. We're going to New Eden then. A delivery drone, as powerful as any from the city, swooped over the water toward them. Dean opened the cargo containers on his rig and pulled out the box of harvested seeds. The drone landed, Dean loaded its cargo container and waved to the cameras. Seconds later, it was flying again, the rotors small but kicking up enough speed to throw dust over all of them. Dana watched over it. That drone came from somewhere on the water. Why do they need seeds? You saw the saturation bombers in the valleys. The Valdez sends those drones all over the coastline to do the same thing, Marco told her. Just wish we could have finished the run ourselves and gone in person. Can we make the trip hauling a broken rig? We'll run a power feed from Freya's cells to our own and keep the broken axle off the ground. It'll be like a powered trailer. We can make it. Freya added new passwords at Dean's dashboard, and the map changed, presenting a new icon that Dana had never seen before. From the look of it, Dean had never seen it on his maps before either. Dean settled in the driver's seat. Next stop, New Eden. Freya nodded, woozy. I really gotta lie down again. I'll help you, Dana said immediately, and Marco took her place in the passenger seat. The anticipation on his face was almost like a living thing. Wherever they were going, Marco and Dean were looking forward to being there with almost a religious glow about them. It was a look she'd never seen from her brother before. Do Arcadians have a holy land? She wondered to herself, remembering the image of Sishan she'd seen in multiple places. Are you sure about this? Marco asked Dean quietly while they waited. Taking me and your sister's gonna ruffle some feathers. I've got my instructions from Yenna herself, Dean assured him. Surprised me too, but I'm not going to argue with her on the grounds that my sister can't be trusted. Dana felt her stomach flutter. Wherever they were going, someone was bending the rules for her to go there. Biting her lip, she tucked Freya warmly into her hammock. Dean's never seen your headquarters before, has he? But you've been there. You added it to the map. My father works there. I haven't been back since I joined the Wheelers. Freya settled in to rest as the rig started rolling. What are you thinking? Dana rolled her eyes. Nothing I haven't said already. I was watching Marco scramble around under your rig running the power line to us, and the sheer competence of people out past the red line floors me. Don't sell yourself too short, you know, Freya offered with a smile. You've made kinetic power generators, helped assemble earth movers, learned to drive at least 2 different vehicles, raised saplings. I know, Dana admitted. So much of what I've seen would save lives back home. The city's declared it flat out illegal, but I really can't figure out why. Freya shook her head. Dana, your brother tells me that one thing civilization drills into you is that you need it to survive. Turns out it's the other way around. Back there, all roads led into town, and the way to handle things like storms and heat was to build fortifications against them. But people don't survive when they bunker down alone. You can load up a survival bunker with everything you need for a lifetime, but your world ends with you, and your bunker becomes a tomb full of empty food wrappers. Dana shook her head. Isn't that what you've got? Xanadu's below ground, the valleys are out of sight, those arrow farms can work in bunkers. Humanity can't, Freya told her. I saw you with those trees in the valley, Dana. You were weeping over them. I've studied pre-collapse times. Every city in history has been removing us from the world further and further. But if we had this sort of thing in the city, Dana started to insist. The frustration on her face was growing stronger. There's got to be a reason. Innovating your way to utopia is an idea that's been around for 100 years. Every generation, they're so sure it'll be different this time. Dean says the city has trees like the valley. They keep them under guard, and only the rich get to see them. Everything we do out here, the cities can do too. Some of them even manage it. Some of them, and some of it they even manage to do better. They just use it differently. There's got to be a reason, Dana insisted. starting to think there are more Arcadians than statics. If there are more of you, then you've got to feed them, clothe them, equip them. Arcadia keeps its resources concealed from the weather. The city keeps its own hidden from each other. There were a few moments of silence, and Freya shut her eyes. Still covered in bruises, Dana wondered if she'd dozed off again. The seaweed farms are the final straw, you know, Freya said, finally. For people like us. What do you mean? The ocean was as messed up by climate collapse as anywhere else. Most of the world's oxygen was coming from ocean plant life, and the ocean was dying. A little more, a little more heat, and the ground floor of ocean life couldn't survive. Freya said softly, like she was telling a scary campfire story. The seaweeds were the ocean's what planting trees was to the land, and it was so easy to set up, at least by the standards of the statics, but then they realized that it was food too. Suddenly the project was declared over, and because they couldn't make a profit on power anymore, the oil and coal ran out and you were either off-grid or Stone Age, Dana said. So they locked up the food and everything else. It wasn't even that hard for them. They made selling seeds illegal, Freya said simply. Foodstuffs get processed before they're sold. Even before collapse, they sold fruit and veg in freezer bags. I heard the majority of kids back then couldn't identify where vegetables came from. All they had to change was to make that mandatory. Everyone eats, and nobody gets a seed they can replant. And then they breed plants without seeds in them, at least not ones that can sprout. Dana put a hand to her face. She was crying and didn't know why. When we first met, you had strawberries with the seeds prized away. Making technology seem like intimidating magic wasn't that big a step, Dana. Tech just evolved so fast you needed to grow up with it. The 2010s, everyone under 20 was raised with devices in their hands, but their parents were too scared to push the wrong button and kept begging their own kids for help. The same generation didn't know how to fix an appliance or do basic maintenance on their cars. Most people just forgot how to do things. So then the powers that be told them not to do anything that involved feeding themselves, and they agreed as long as they were fed anyway. They built a system where you had to pay to stay alive, Dana said quietly, finally getting it. Then they told the people who couldn't pay to go out and fix the planet. I wasn't born yet, but it's practically a folktale for Arcadians, Freya said softly. The first of us figured out how easy it was to make seaweed farms, and they declared they wouldn't need food from the government anymore. The government ordered them to come back under pain of imprisonment. They drove just a little out of reach, and the rest is history. Your way is cheaper, sustainable, can apparently accommodate more people than live in the city combined, Dana said softly. But the city made your way illegal. There's gotta be a reason. Freya smiled a bit. I'd love to know what it is. Alright, gang. I think we're gonna call for a break there. So we're going to be right back. It'll be about 15 minutes. And in that time, I would heartily suggest that you have a little break yourself. If you've been sitting along with me, get up, stretch, walk around a little bit. Definitely get hydrated, especially if you haven't been drinking water along with me. Take any necessary medications if you need them. This is your reminder. Pet your pets for me, as of course they need love. And take care of things generally. Like I said, we'll be back in at most 15 minutes. Where we will pick up with Chapter 10 and find out, now that Dana has had her epiphany, what we'll find at New Eden. But shall we? Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody. Last we left off, we found that the hailstorms in this occasionally horrifying post-climate collapse world are just as aggressive as one would expect, with fist-sized hail that just really sneaks up on you. And said fist-sized hail, in fact, did partially ruin the rig of one of our intrepid adventurers, and we've been having to have the other rig tow the broken rig on their way to their destination. Startlingly, their destination has been changed by orders from higher up within Wheeler society, Arcadian society even, shifting their destination from the Valdez project, a abandoned, well, formerly abandoned oil rig that is now producing sea-based power, instead shifting their destination to the head of Arcadian society, the capital, as it were, as much as you can have a capital in uh, a society so distributed as Arcadia, uh, to New Eden. New Eden, a place being kept secret from even most Arcadians, the people outside the city. Uh, they had to get specific encryption clearance to even be able to see where New Eden is on the map. In the meanwhile, as our destination has shifted, Dana had an epiphany about why the city does what it does. If we could do all this work to farm better food and house and feed people and make a better planet, why wouldn't they do that? Why couldn't they do that? Why don't they do that? Well, it's because people would have to work together, and they've been taught that working together and working on their own things just doesn't mesh with polite, proper society, does it? So that's what's been happening in a nutshell. If you missed out on the most recent outing here, but with that in mind, let's dive into chapter 10. The rig moved slower, towing another one behind it. They spent days driving, charging, and driving again. They were further from the red line than Dana could imagine. She'd always known the world was out here, but she was long past the edge of any map she'd seen. Oh, excuse me. And there it is, Dean said, finally. Dana looked where he was pointing and her jaw dropped. The first thing she saw were the colors. There were huge canopies and sunshades made of colorful silks. The second thing she saw was the water. They'd been following the coastline, but the terrain had raised somewhat, first as hills, then jagged cliffs along the sea. Coming in from the coastal line, Dana could see a low, running river that rolled over some short waterfalls into the sea. But up at the top of the canyon, she could see rows of above-ground dwellings, designed in the form of everything from printed domes to mud bricks to yurts. There were sunshades between the dwellings which looked like windbreaks, made from cloth and silk. Dana could see the windbreaks waving back and forth in the breeze, slowing the wind for what was underneath them. She could see anchor cables and realized each windbreak was like the kite turbines of the valley, constantly moving and generating power. In fact, she could see shades of everything she'd seen before: trees and turbines and solar collectors, running waterfalls, turning mills, rice paddies down where the water settled, and carefully tended narrow orchard as natural barriers between each section. The rigs had a place to park, which was part campground and part transport terminal at the edge of the colony. Goods were being carried in and out from the few rigs set up there. Dana got the feeling that this colony was totally self-sufficient, and the Wheelers did most of their work far away from it. Dean parked the rig, and they walked farther into the middle of the space. The ramp that had originally been cut to dig deeper was wide enough to accommodate their homes, their workshops, their power terminals, container parks, and aero farms. As they walked, Dana recognized more. There were crops of flowers with beehives built with protection from the sun, like the lavender fields. There were shacks rolling out printed solar cells or cultivating meat for public barbecues, like at Miller's scrapyard. Sorry. People were just going about their day, working on things like a beehive, all devoted with unstoppable energy toward their tasks. There was an awesome feeling of wholeness about the place, and Dana swiftly understood. The other places aren't finished yet, she breathed in awe. Freya smiled warmly, so happy for her. Count the ways. Dana looked carefully. Aerofarms and printers from millers, fruit and trees from the valleys, Flowers and solar shelters like the lavender fields, kite turbines like in the valleys, solar shelters like the scrapyards, 100 things I can't even begin to describe beside. This is the final form of all of it. No, actually, this is the first form, Freya grinned. Everything you've seen out there, this place isn't copying all those ideas, they're copying this. New Eden is where the valley got the blueprints for kite turbines. New Eden's where the Miller's scrapyard got their first printers made. This is the origin point of Arcadia. This is everything I've seen since going past the red line, Dana summed up. Because I can remember thinking there were so many options. An orchard in a valley can't rely on solar power. A small project like the lavender plants can't build a huge wind turbine. A mobile base like the Valdez can't rely on living underground like a freehold. She looked again. Almost all those possibilities, they seem to be at home here together. Well, that's how it works in a monoculture, where everything has only one option, only one way. Means they're all vulnerable to the same weakness. Nothing can last without variety. This place has all the projects combined. This is Freya, sorry. This place has all the projects combined together. This place is the finished product of everything the freeholds and the projects are trying to become, Freya said, as if describing a dream. A place where technology, nature, humanity, civilization, they're all the same thing. A place where nobody's hungry, nobody's scared for tomorrow, where beauty and function are part of each other rather than in competition, where everything has the right to exist and nothing is exploited or wasted for profit. Dana wanted to cry at just the idea of it, let alone the sight of it actually existing. New Eden. She sighed, soft as a prayer come true. Dean smiled, happy for her. New Eden is our origin point and our final form. One day we hope that every project, every colony, maybe every inch of the world would be like this one way or another, but for now it's only a small part of the whole. He looked hard at his sister. You understand why we keep this such a secret, right? I mean, this is our headquarters. Unlike every other project in Freehold, we can't just pull up stakes and move this somewhere else. Why have you brought me here? Dana asked, without anger or fear. She couldn't be either right now. There's no way your word alone will be enough to get me in. Yena asked for you, Dean said, with the same odd voice that he had when talking about New Eden itself. Dana was about to ask when Freya jumped forward. Dad, she called, running to an older man who was coming down the staircases. It's so good to see you. Freya, welcome home. The older man hugged her tightly, and Dana felt a pang. It had been almost a decade since her father had hit retirement age. Almost a decade since anyone had hugged her like that. The older man was spry, distinguished, with a gleam of a near omniscient understanding in his eyes, and a smile that said the world was getting better every day. Dana was amused by the way Dean almost came to attention in his presence. Sir, he gestured to Dana, I brought your special order in. He made introductions. Dana, meet Kalen. He's Freya's father, and he runs operations for Arcadia. He's the man who gives marching orders to the Wheelers. Dana consciously kept herself from hiding behind Dean. Pleased to meet you. Well, your brother flatters me because he's sucking up to his girlfriend's father. Kalen beamed, shaking her hand. As it happens, he's right. We're glad to have you here. I still don't know why I was summoned, but whatever it is, I'm glad. Sorry, I heard something outside and it startled me. This place it's just perfect. I don't know why the whole world can't be like this, but it's a highlight of my life just seeing the place. Kalen led the way up the staircases, narrating a bit. The walls of the mine were full of tunnels. Most of them collapsed over the years, others we sealed off for ourselves for safety. What's left is rock solid, but it leaves plenty of room-sized holes in the walls. He smiled at Dana. We don't waste a resource like space. We also don't entertain newcomers too often. Hopefully the guest room is to your liking. Sure enough, there were plenty of cliff dwellers. Dana could see the woven textiles covering over the cliff sides like enormous leaves protecting nests within. The covers were shaped by spires made from metal or bamboo, and each covering protected a cave opening, or a stairwell up and down the side of the stone walls. The open space was a town, and the walls were another town above. Finally got a high-rise view, Dana thought distantly of the gold sector domes. Dana followed the staircases up to her room. It was cool and dry with a bamboo wall providing privacy. The furniture was mostly bamboo construction as well. On one of the walls was the same icon of a woman in a red hood and cloak, with sunlight and fresh water flowing from her out to the world. Nice furniture. Almost without thinking about it, Dana closed her eyes and stretched her hands out. She couldn't feel either side. The cliff chamber was bigger than the rooms of her house, wider than the rig. She had more room here than she ever did in the city, and more privacy than the valley could afford. The thought made her want to cry. Instead, she opened her eyes and turned to Kalen. He was watching her little ritual as though he knew exactly what she was thinking. I still don't know why I was summoned here. I understand. Yana asked to speak with you about that, but you've been on the road a while, and you'll want to be fresh tomorrow. I'll have someone bring up some food. Get some sleep, champ. We'll be with you soon enough. Dean smiled for her, following Freya and her father out of the chamber. The door shut behind them on rails, not hinges, leaving her to herself. Dana took out her notebook and wrote for a while. Every now and then she'd turn back to the early pages, full of fire and rage against the Fearles for breaking the rules, making it nearly impossible for her to act like herself around them. But herself had changed. She found she loathed her own responses from when she'd first seen the scrapyard. The bed was bamboo. No hammock slung down the middle of a rig, no bed of soft grass under a tree, an actual bed. First one she'd slept in for almost a year. Good night, Arcadia, she whispered and slept. When Dana woke, she found someone in her doorway, looking out at the canyon. She was the oldest woman Dana had ever seen. Her eyes shone and her hair was radiant white. She was wrapped in a colorful silk that didn't look so much like an outfit as a single cloth that wrapped around and around her, neck to knees. Dana slid out of her bed, quickly pulled her clothes on, and came over, not saying anything. The woman was like a statue, but not of stone. There was almost an aura around her, made of light and gentleness. She had the impression of a fairy tale creature, like she'd grown straight from this oasis of life. Dana sat on the edge of the cliffside beside her and spoke quietly, feeling like it was wrong to make loud noise in her presence. You must be Anna. The old woman gave a single nod. What do you think of it? Dana took a deep breath. I think it's wonderful. You can do better than that. Dana bit her lip and pointed down to the waterline. Those trees. When I was in the valleys, I suddenly realized that I'd seen the whole manufacturing system play out, from scrap metal to colony. It just hit me I've seen the whole nature cycle, too. Dean went alone when he traded gold flecks from the scrapyard to get some seeds. The wheelers and freeholders prepared the parched ground with seed crops like lavender fields and water catchments. They start with a few seeds. Those seeds grow into a few trees that the valleys keep protected and cultivated, safe from the sun and wind. The trees make hundreds of seeds, the valley collects all of them, and the wheelers take them to projects like the Valdez, who straight up saturate the plains with seeds along the coast, and leave forests and orchards behind. And those forests and orchards feed us and our children, provide us with homes, shelter, tools, heat. Yana sighed happily. It's almost holy how perfectly the whole system works. Not sure there's an almost about it. It was all dry rock once, before Sushan came. The governments of the city-states decided that an attempt to restore the ecosystem out here was worth the cost of sending prisoners. Yana waved to the cave drawing. Sushan was the leader of that work. She dreamed it, and she was able to convince others in the city to start the initiative. She led the first team herself, her and the people who couldn't afford to feed their families. Dana looked up at the painting. What happened to her? When the city pulled the plug, Sushan refused to go back. She had gone so much farther than the other teams, nobody was going to come back for her. Alone, she nearly died, but then Sushan found this place. With only a few dry ration bars left and no water to drink, she stumbled into this canyon trying to find shelter from the sandstorms. The pools at the bottom of the canyon had turned to salt, so Shan saw a trickle of water coming from the stone, and to hear her tell it, she crawled up and suckled the water from the rock. Dana looked out at the canyon, trying to picture this. According to her journals, she stayed there for hours, one sip at a time. But when she'd drunk her fill, she found weeds growing under the trickle, and the dandelions were edible. Wasn't much, but it kept her alive for a day. She smiled. When the storms had passed and she had rested, Shishan pulled at the opening where the water trickled out, looking for a handhold, and somehow pulled enough of the rock and sand away that the trickle became a river. The old woman pointed up the canyon to the mouth of the river. According to her journal, she was horrified, thinking she'd just pulled the plug on an aquifer of some kind. Groundwater can't last forever, you know. Her pointing finger lifted to the top of the canyon wall. She climbed up and tried to find her way to help, but the wasteland's tricky and harsh. She walked for 2 days, only to wind up back at this canyon. But the river had run all that time, and the weeds had sprung up fast and thick, so when she arrived back, there were plenty of edible wildflowers and dandelions. Dana barked out a laugh. So Shan gathered everything she could and began her trek again. Finally, she made her way back to the city. That concrete jungle with walls on all sides was no less of a canyon than this place. The homeless gathered around the shelters fighting over scraps were no less desperate for a better life than Sushan was in this canyon, looking for anything edible. So she came back? She found the other work parties, told them of a place where they could shelter and where there was water. They were the first of Arcadia. They came back and found the whole place transformed. Little wildflowers with their roots underground had poked their way up to daylight when the river started to run. The canyon was never dead rock, just waiting for the right conditions. Sleeping, if you would. It was a carpet of beautiful reds, purples, and yellows. The old woman had tears gathering in her eyes. They dug irrigation. Those weeds had friends growing. The storms came again, and they saw the seeds blowing out of the canyon, planting themselves here and there. Wild grasses that needed little moisture grew from them. Dana listened to the story like it was an old folk tale and had an epiphany. You knew her. I never met her. She was my grandmother. I wonder sometimes if we remember it wrong. She gestured at the cave painting. She's more than our founder. She's our hero, almost a legend at this point. But after 2 or 3 generations, a good story is as close to the facts as anyone needs. In my head, I know that dandelions don't have much to them, but back in the city there were weeds with little dandelion flowers. I saw people eat them on the spot. Yenna smiled like she was talking about an old friend. When I was your age, I followed the route my grandmother took back toward the city, and here and there I saw weeds and dandelions growing. She raised an eyebrow at Dana. Can you guess? The ones Shishan carried from her first trek. The seeds dropped as she walked. Weeds grow well, even in mostly lifeless soil. Shishan had made little caches of edibles for anyone walking the same way. Dana looked out over New Eden and listened to the water running down the middle of the canyon. Was it groundwater? She heard herself ask. I can't imagine a river coming from a groundwater aquifer that could support a place this size running so strong for 3 generations. No, indeed, Yenna nodded knowingly. The aquifer she tapped was rainwater from the wet season. This canyon's artificial. Used to be a mine. They dug 100 meters deep to get more metal. They piled the dirt high around the sides as they dug the center deeper. Then they paved and dug further to make a path to the sea. I got pictures of the place back then, with huge conveyor belts extending out over the water, and the ore rolling off the end of it over the water where a cargo ship was watching it. Didn't even need a truck. They abandoned the mine when they'd sucked the spot dry. She drew out her own device from her robes and turned the screen to her. This is what we started with. Dana stared at the picture. She'd seen cities, forests, outback dust bowls. Every one of them had some kind of a life to them. This, it was a picture of a wound in the earth. Really? This is like such a fantastic moment for the book here. And now is when the internet decides, no, I don't want to work. Really? Hang on. Let me fix it. Everybody cross your fingers. Come on. You can do it. Raise your hands. Believe. Come on, internet. You can do it. There we go. That's a little better. Whew. We were getting to a really good spot in the book, and then the internet decided, no, you can't open source this knowledge. That's illegal. Anyway, this was a picture of a wound in the earth. They dug deep, made it ugly, left it open and gaping. It was a horror show. There was no life clinging to the wreckage, making a place for itself. This was an open grave the size of a city. She looked up, trying to picture the transformation to what it was now. They dug deep and piled the dirt around the edge so the walls grew higher, and then the ocean rose. The tunnels? All the tunneling made the interior walls of those tunnels quite permeable to rainwater. Broken up rock made plenty of spaces for the water to seep in, same way groundwater usually works. When the ocean rose, the lower tunnels were flooded with seawater, which isn't so good for farming and drinking, but it does help with turning turbines. She gestured upwards. You've seen kite turbines and windmill pumps before. During the dry, we pump seawater from the lower tunnels to the higher ones. Pumped hydropower in the middle of a drought. Dana wanted to laugh. And I know for a fact that other projects have catchment areas for when the rains come hammering down. I'm guessing it's just a matter of keeping a freshwater aquifer and a saltwater tide from flowing into each other. Ooh, footnote about pumped hydropower. Pumped hydro energy is already in use around the world. The idea is to use times of power surplus to pump water from low reservoirs into higher ones, so that in times of drought and energy storage, the same water can be used in hydroelectric stations. Yeah, real thing. Tom Scott actually did a whole video on one of those hydroelectric pumping stations. Essentially, they use it as a giant kinetic battery. Overnight when people are using a lot less electricity, and we're still generating all of this electricity, they take this body of water and pump it up into a higher lake. Usually they use existing reservoirs whenever possible, so then they don't have to build quite so much. And then, during peak energy usage, when people are like, getting home from work or, turning on the television, or in Britain's case, making tea in the middle of an episode of Doctor Who, that's to cover surges and fill in for, gaps in the grid, as it were. A lot of the resistance to renewable power at this point is, oh, it's so inconsistent. How are we going to store all this? Well, you got to get clever with it. Use kinetic energy batteries, for example. And a lot of it's like, oh, well, these coal-fired plants, they're constantly spinning at one rate, and then we can up them for spikes so they can cover. Well, renewable also has answers for that. It just takes a little more thinking. Anyway, I digress. The tunnels and shafts were already provided for us by the long-dead miners. That's not even counting desalination. The monsoon season refills our aquifers, and being so close to the ocean, we don't flood out. It's a beautiful place. You made something so hideous into something wonderful. Sushan convinced the others to come back with her, and they made this place something better. The world they built here was too practical to remain in one place only. New Eden was her baby, but everything that came after is her legacy. Makes it my responsibility now. Dana pulled her head in a bit. I'm really grateful that you let me come here to see this, but I'm not really sure why you invited me. Yana shrugged as though it was obvious. Because I need your counsel. I'm too close to this world. The statics are too far from me. I need to know what only you could know. Dana blinked slowly. Clearly I'm dreaming. Yana led her up the walkways and staircases until they reached open ground level. The community was larger than visible from within the canyon, and Dana looked around with no small amount of awe. Everywhere that she'd seen as a permanent colony was sheltered underground somehow. This was the full fir- was This was the first full-fledged town of people that lived in the open, surrounding the center in a neat pattern. As within the lower level, this place was full of color and movement and lush plant life. Yana led her to a larger structure, and Dana saw several different rigs parked around it. There was a steady flow of people walking in and out, and all of them nodded deferentially to Yana as they passed. Dana felt their eyes pass over her, too, wondering who this stranger was and why Yana was escorting her personally. It was a question Dana wanted answered, too. Yana led the way into the largest structure. There were several older people here, each of them surrounded by a small group of people. They were each having small conferences, and Dana was able to pick up bits of conversation to indicate they were all talking. Part in one project or another. One group was talking about weather patterns, another group talking about new gear being developed and modeled, a third organizing disaster relief and salvage. Yana led them through the foyer area and into another, much larger room. Dana realized swiftly what this room was for, with a large table in the middle and half a dozen place settings, a huge map of the whole world on one wall. The table was thick lumber, polished till it shone like a gemstone. It was the only extravagant piece of furniture Dana had ever seen. Dana hadn't known this room existed, but she knew at once it was where the leadership of Arcadia gathered. Dean was in front of the table, waiting to address the leadership. Dana slid in next to her brother, and Yana took her spot at the head of the table. That aura of leadership around her was never more apparent, but she smiled warmly at Dana. Now then, by now I'm sure you've figured out your unique status among Arcadia. She saw Dana nod and wasn't satisfied with that. Speak up. I know that city refugees don't see nearly as much as I have. Having Dean waiting for me made the difference. Dean had to ask for special permission to take you in. Freya's father's one of our leadership here, so the matter came to my attention. Banner said no to having a newcomer be so mobile. Freya appealed the ruling to her father. I got the swing vote. She gave Dana a look. Do you know why I said yes? I truly can't imagine. Yana chuckled. Because, my dear, totally independent of your time with us, Dean has a second matter brought to our attention. The repository. He feels it could be a major advantage in the Arcadian agenda. Yana's gaze narrowed at Dana. Do you know what that agenda is? I didn't, at least not till last night. Not for sure. Then I saw this place. For months now, I've been trying to figure out what the Wheelers wanted. It's not like back in the city. Back there, you would have made it when you're out of the shelters and can afford to stay that way. Maybe leave something to your kids. I could never figure out the Wheeler dream because you keep giving away your surplus to each other. Now I understand why. It's because the Wheelers are just the delivery guys. In fact, why even have a headquarters? Everything I've seen is decentralized. The cities put all the power and wealth in one place. Why do you? Well, mostly because I'm an old woman and riding the routes isn't as easy for me. But if this place burned to the ground tomorrow, well, the work would continue, thanks to people like your brother. The Wheelers are a vital but nonetheless single specific aspect of the design. And there's considerable risk, because on this continent, the Wheelers are the only part of our world that the city-states know about for sure, since they had a hand in creating them. The Wheelers are our infrastructure, our camouflage and line of defense, but we've grown so much larger than what we were, Dana. Dana waved a hand in the general direction of the colony. This is the goal, isn't it? To have everyone in the world be like New Eden one day? Yena traded a look with Dean. As many places as we can get, at least. Best case scenario, we fix the whole world. Worst case, we can fix as many as we can protect. What does that mean? Dana glanced back at the map. Come to think of it, why spread out so far? I mean, I get that your whole philosophy here is to spread out and decentralize, but why create so much work for yourself? The projects are one thing. Why spread your people out so far that you need to have half your workforce living in mobile rigs? Dean gave her a look. You sure you want to know? Dana nodded. Dean lowered his voice. The climate collapse isn't over yet. Boom. Dana felt her heart give a thump so strong it was like a bass drum had just roared in her ears. After that, she felt nothing, like her heartbeat had just stopped in disbelief. What? I don't understand. It was over. It's over. They said it was over. They said we just had to hold on now. They said. Dean held her hand tightly as if trying to keep her from falling apart. Easy, champ. Take it slow. There's a lot more to it. Dana fought to get herself under control, and when she settled, Yana took over the explanation. The earth is tilted, she intoned, bringing up the image of the earth on the room's hollow. A 3D picture of the earth, turning in space, all gray-blue oceans and tan-colored land masses, with hints of green here and there. That tilt is how we get seasons because of the top half of the earth inclined either towards the sun or away from it, depending on the time of the year. Dana nodded. But that means that the equator line is always the hottest point. It never changes distance. So the ocean closer to the equator is warmer than the water at the poles. Dean piped up then. You've seen how that works in things like boiling water. Heat always rises. The water down close to the heating element boils and rises at the top of the pot, and the cooler water sinks till it gets boiled and rises again. Steam never stays at the bottom. So, what does that have to do with the collapse? Dana asked, calming as she focused on the lesson. Yana tapped at the hollow, and Dana watched as the holographic landmasses turned green and vibrant, the ocean changing colors to become more beautiful and healthy. The poles turned to solid ice white. This was the Earth before. As the water at the equator warmed, it caused movement against the cooler waters, formed a natural cycle. Warmth was taken from the equator to the poles, and cooler water moved to take its place. The movement of warm, salty water displacing the cooler, less salty water, and vice versa. She gestured at the poles. But when we heated up the world, the ice melted, and the freshwater-saltwater ratio changed completely. Dana had never been taught any of this, but that was true of a lot of things. So, the currents are breaking down? Has been since before the collapse started, her brother confirmed. The storms are still raging every winter, and the temperature gets more extreme, swinging from heat waves to ice storms. While overall global temperatures increased, the thermohaline currents regulate temperature in a lot of places. Some of us believe that a second ice age might be inevitable in some parts of the northern hemisphere. In our part of the world, he spread his hands wide. The ocean currents decide the tropical storm season. Dana sank into herself. The great storm isn't over yet? She repeated weakly. It was the scariest monster she had ever been told about from the cradle onward. Hey, look at me, Dean said sharply. Our whole lives are mobile, underground, hidden away, scattered like seeds on the wind. We can do that in winter just fine. We keep growing and constructing every winter. If it does happen, we're already prepared. Forests, animals, people, we can all survive the alpine world. Plenty of places already do. And if we can create another 1,000 places where animals and people can hold up, another 1,000 mobile farms, another 1,000... I get it. But what about the cities? They'd never survive that kind of pressure on the infrastructure. The statics surely have all the same information we do, her brother said roughly. If they chose to prepare by ignoring it, then so be it. Dana recoiled. Something in her shouted no at that thought. But even so, she couldn't argue with it, because she knew he was telling the truth. Once again, this is a worst-case scenario. Our whole agenda, as you correctly pointed out, is to remake the world in such a way that the catastrophe can either be prevented or overcome. We are having an effect, my dear girl. With luck and with effort, we may yet succeed. She saw that Dana was unconvinced and moved on. In any event, that's tomorrow's problem, my dear. Right now, we have a far more immediate mission to concern ourselves with. The repository. We will be holding a meeting in an hour to discuss the plan, now that we've established certain facts. I'd like you to attend. The leadership of Arcadia assembled in the meeting room soon after. There were 4 people gathered around the table, and it was clear that there was room for a 5th who was not in attendance. 5 people in charge of all this? Dana thought. Around the room were several other people. Many of them Dana recognized from the conversations happening outside. These were the people with business that the leadership needed to vote on. For the most part, it was routine. Sharing resources, approval for adjustments to construction. Kalen took discussions about the Wheelers' agenda, changing routes that Dana had never heard of. Yana took decisions where different fields overlapped. But then Yana rose to her feet as if making an announcement. Well, that just leaves one more piece of new business. Yana addressed the room. In 3 generations, we've never once run a project that deliberately reached out to any of the cities directly. We've never done anything designed to get their attention or affect their people. Until now. And she gestured for Dana to step forward. The leadership of Arcadia were all looking at her. They were strangers who already knew all about her. Dana felt like she was facing Crawley again. Yana spoke to her first, keeping her tone as light as possible. Dana, I know you're still relatively new to our way of life, but the people you've been working with are quite complimentary. Your arrival here with the council is a matter of some controversy given your short tenure, but I wanted them to hear it from you. Yes, ma'am, Dana said automatically. You've been told the details of Project 451, a database of all our tricks and technology to produce food, water, clothing, transport, power, everything we know about rewilding, if not where we're actively doing so. Yana spread her hands wide. You understand the reason? The source of conflict with the city is our opposite ideologies regarding resource management, Kalen put in. Given the trending increase in the rate of people leaving the city to make a life among our own, it's been theorized that if the city was given the same tools we have, then perhaps this could ease the refugee crisis without violence. We're hoping you can confirm this, or at least give us the view of a static. Could this plan work? Dana hesitated. It's not a trick, Dana. There's no wrong answer. I just want to know your opinion. Of all the people in this room, you've lived in the city the longest and the most recently. You became part of our world mostly over your own objections. In fact, everyone in the city will be in a similar state to where you were before you came to the valleys. Hungry, hopeless, convinced there was no other way that really worked. So, in your opinion, what would they do when they get the chance to learn what you have? It was almost the exact same question that Dean had asked her when she'd first found out about the repository. She'd had time to think about her answer now, but had never spoken in front of an audience. She cleared her throat and spoke as clearly as she could, all the things she wanted to say just jumbling a bit in her mind. If I could send anything from here to the city, it would be a message. I would say that we haven't really changed. Dana began, and suddenly it came pouring out of her passionately. Human nature is such that we're barely aware of what's beyond ourselves, or what was here before we can remember. God, or Mother Nature, or whatever you want to call it, whatever began the world set up all the basic needs of life. And all these things were sources of joy just in their existence. The trees and the grasses are very beautiful, and they are necessities of life for everything that breathes. When the world began, we didn't eat protein slime. We ate apples, oranges, grapes, honey. When humanity began, the necessary parts of staying alive were the most enjoyable parts of being alive. It was our civilization that decided to call these things luxuries and started charging for them. Who in the city has dealt with a basic necessity by making it the most enjoyable part of life? She looked around her audience and saw they were agreeing. Deep down, on some level that can't be forgotten or beaten out of us, we still remember. We know that we're meant to appreciate beauty, enjoy variety. I knew it the first time I walked barefoot on long green grass or felt a cat purr. I climbed that tree to pick the sweet red fruits and I felt safe, like I was where I was meant to be. I'd never felt that before. Everything in the city, it's only yours for as long as you can keep paying. If I could give my friends back in town anything, it'd be that feeling. The knowledge that even with the earth sucked dry and the planet itself close to dead, the original systems still work. A seed will still sprout into life. A tree will still drink up the poison air and give back blessed oxygen. The sun will still warm you. Water still nourishes the thirsty ones. And if it takes more ingenuity to provide water and more effort to cultivate a tree, then it still only works because that's what life is meant to do. A human can't make a seed without a full grown tree, and we can't make thirst go away without water. All of this, everything in Arcadia, is just helping it along, helping the method that's worked since the dawn of life on Earth. We can help it grow or cut it down, but we can't change what the method is or how it works. She happened to notice Dean. His eyes were shining. Frey was holding him gently, tearing up herself. She saw similar reactions, if a bit more reserved, from the rest of the Arcadian leaders. She saw Banner standing in the doorway. She wasn't sure when he arrived, but it was clear he'd heard enough. He seemed more impressed by her speech than anyone. Yana let the moment stretch, let Dana settle a bit, and then asked another question. I'm given to understand that you've been keeping a journal of your experiences. How has this understanding changed you, you think? Dana was silent for a long moment, as though thinking before speaking was a spell Yana was casting. But finally she knew the answer. I don't think I can go back to what I was before. Yana smiled at her counterparts, as though that explained everything. Imagine what the city would be like if everyone there had taken the same journey. If even a fraction of them come to realize what Dana has, the city will be a very different place within a year. I didn't say that. Most people would be happy just to have real food or even more variety in flavors or colors, but the Fringers, they were reporting your test launch as a probing attack. They'll have their people pounce on anything you send over the walls. Your repository, it'll never make it into the general population. Yana took that in. Then send 12 launches, and if that's not enough, send 100. Enough that people will look, enough that they can't help but look, enough that they'll be able to look without fear of reprisal. She turned to the rest of the leadership. It's our way to be in so many places we can't shut down. We can't be shut down. Why not this too? Dean sat bolt upright in his chair, smothering a squeak. Clearing his throat quickly, he rose. Ma'am, we don't have the parts made for that many. It'd take the printers in my rig and the ones on the Valdez more than a month to build, assemble, and ship. Yana gave her people a challenging look. Dana saw the dare on her face. Anyone want to say no? The industrial printers could cover that many if we had the meat in one place for a maker's meet, Kalen suggested. In fact, if you're going to make multiple copies of the data for multiple launches, you'll probably need a maker's meet organized anyway. Produce, build, and duplicate all in one day. And there's the helium to consider, Freya added. It's the only lighter than air compound we've got. It's hard to find. Hot air wouldn't cut it over that distance. Using drones would never get past the windbreak walls. She's right. City defenses are always scanning for possible drone strike. Dana agreed, feeling excited. Is this really happening? Am I a part of this? She thought. Caitlin turned to Yenna. We don't use helium for much, I admit. High altitude weather monitoring, raising turbines, cooling some pressurized equipment, arc welding in underwater projects. It's a specialty item. This is a specialty case, Yenna said seriously. If it works, it's worth all those other things combined, and we can find alternatives for most of them. She gave them each a look, and they nodded approval. All right, I'm issuing a general order to send as much of our helium stores as needed to the Maker's Meet. Dana felt her heart flip again. This was an all-out assault on the city, and their weapon was an encyclopedia of how to make their standard of living better without money or violence. Hope against hunger. This is Dean. Most of the people with industrial level printers stay mobile, going where the gear is needed. After our losses at Miller's, they're fully involved trying to replace the rigs that were lost. A number of the people we'll need for 451 are already together for barn raisings. I can meet with them while they work and set up the meet. Before you do that, Kalen raised a hand as he also noticed Banner and waved him in. There's another factor that I need you all to be aware of. For this, I will yield the floor to our head of security. Banner, bring us up to date. Banner, with the road dust still in his clothes, stepped into the middle of the room and began speaking. As you all know by now, the nearest city-state has begun escalating their campaign against Arcadia. They are now making deliberate attacks with military technology. Something like that's never happened before. I've spent several months working to uncover why the change. As I recall, you thought it was someone on the ground, someone locating targets for the city to hit. I thought that because they'd never been able to find us before. The attacks were hard to predict because they seemed random. The earliest attacks were on shipping and salvage projects like Miller's scrapyard. They were easy to understand given that our people gather there and rely on the resources, but the method of attack was one of convenience. Banner rubbed his eyes. The later attacks were far more specialized. They involved a military force and deliberate intel on what they were hitting. That's what made me think espionage. There's just no way the city could have found some of those freeholds unless someone come out and looked. And you have identified this person? Yana pressed. Banner looked over at Dana, who felt her heart stop, but Banner spoke again. In an effort to identify anyone working for the Fringers, I deployed bait. Something I felt would be tempting enough to draw out a spy. Put the story out that we were making a major update to our network security. As you know, such major updates are rare and require a connection made to everyone on our network. I put the word out that the new update included a location map for every project, freehold and wheeler in the region, complete with the latest encryption. Banner nodded. A spy would have jumped at it. I had almost a dozen data cards made for the update. What were they really? Kalen asked. A kill switch designed to disrupt static networks. Our network architecture and the stuff they use in the city are totally different. They can't hack us, but we can't access them. That data card would have done two things. One, would have sent me an alert saying it had been used, and two, it would have virused any city terminal or device it was plugged into, spread quickly to any network device. Banner sighed. I put several copies out. None have been used. The last suspect I was hoping to hear about has died in an outbreak of Langford's malady in the Central Plains freeholds. The data card that Suresh gave me, Dana thought. It was actually a Trojan horse. You created a cyber weapon. You weren't authorized for this. Due respect, ma'am, I was engaged in a spy hunt. Fewer people who knew how, the better. And the debate's academic anyway. I'm now satisfied there's no Fringer agents in Arcadia. Dana had expected that to be good news, but the leadership reacted like it was a bad thing. The attacks are too widespread and too low reward. They were going out of their way to pick low priority targets. It's my belief that they're targeting a specific project. I think they're trying to stop 451. Dana felt Dean turn to stone beside her. Are you sure? Scrapyard was the first hit, then Valdez. We've determined that both those attacks were timed to occur together. Banner started counting. Salt Mine was the first strike that involved interrogation of an Arcadian. He'd made his contribution to the repository less than a week before. Smaller attacks on the freeholds, also people involved in 451. Took a while to notice the pattern, since the people involved are widespread and involved in several projects. The downside of decentralization, Dana thought. If they don't have spies on the ground, how could the city even know about 451? They don't. But they know we sent something over their... Oh, this is Dean. They don't, but they know we sent something over their walls, even if it was months ago. They likely know we're planning to do it again. They might not know what it is, but that's enough. The city still insists there's nothing out here but cannibals and ferals. If Arcadia can organize something like an airdrop at all, it's proof that they're lying about that. And to address the point nobody is discussing, if they are targeting 451, it's the better option. The room sighed a bit, as though they'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. Dana blinked and turned to Freya. Wait, what am I missing? If it's not a campaign against one thing, then it's a campaign against everything they can find, Freya summed up. If we hold a maker's meet to get 451 built, what are the odds that it'll come under attack? Caitlin asked Banner. Banner hesitated. I'm not sure. We haven't held a full meet since Miller's, and they've escalated high-altitude drone patrols since then. If they're watching for the project, getting it done fast might be our only hope of getting it done at all. If they're looking for any Arcadian targets, it's very likely we'd be creating one. Why? Dana asked herself again. Why violence at all? Even now, under constant threat of attack, there's not one voice in here that's suggesting violent retaliation against the city. What's Crawley afraid of? Organizing the Arcadians with printers and assembly tools would take a while. Freya and Kalen worked for a while at the maps of the region, trying to find the right spot to assemble. The threat of attack on the gatherings meant they had to take precautions and move the makers into a range of rendezvous points without drawing attention first. Dana used the time to write up her own contribution. Plenty of former statics had added their testimony, offering reassurance to anybody that took up the repository that the information was true and the methods were safe to try. Dean was provided a list of people who could handle the construction of the parts needed for the delivery and had returned to his rig, writing up a set of instructions that could be copied and given to each of them. The more people working on the project, the faster it would get done, but the more likely it would be noticed. Dana had little to do until they got moving, so she sought out Banner. Before we go, can I clear the air? Banner sighed and found somewhere out of the way to sit. You aren't a suspect. You passed my test when you destroyed that data card on the spot. But you wanted it to be me. You wanted me to be a Fringer spy. Banner didn't deny it. It would have wrapped everything up nice and neat. I could have stopped you. Our lives would go back to the way they were. Spy would have been our only hope of heading it off for a day. Meaning? Crawley runs the city now. Number of people leaving town and heading for the Red Line jumps every year. There's a refugee crisis brewing. None of them know where to go. There's been a stalemate between Arcadia and the city because they never overlap, and that's changing now. Dana felt sick. I didn't understand Arcadia when I first arrived. This city has people who make a living by informing on others. It's not an act of cowardice or cruelty, it's the law. You have to inform on infringements. Dana spread her hands. I didn't understand a world where hungry people shared everything they have. I didn't understand a world where everyone was free to build things for themselves and get taught how. Banner shook his head in open pity. Can't imagine how you people live like that, constantly afraid to think new thoughts or learn new skills for fear of it bankrupting you. I don't know what to tell you. They take advantage of everything they've got. Why wouldn't they find a way to make life cheaper and more efficient if it worked? Banner finally looked at her directly. If every household had an arrow farm, if seeds were still capable of sprouting and everyone could cultivate their own meat, would the city allow it? If they did, would you suddenly have your rations cut? After all, if you had your own food supply, it'd be your own fault if you starved to death. Dana nearly gagged on her own tongue. He was right about that. If half the things she'd seen in Arcadia were used, the city would find other ways. There's gotta be a reason, she said desperately, clutching at the blind hope that she'd been stuck with since birth. There's gotta be something there that isn't pure greed and spite. My parents lived their whole lives behind those windbreaks. So did their parents. It can't just be because they want us to stay hungry, can it? And Banner actually smiled at her. There it is. I finally get it. You're not defending the city, you're defending your family and the lives they lived. He almost laughed. Dana, of all the propaganda you've repeated to me since we met, I can understand you not wanting to see your family as slaves and the lives they led as bad. And oddly enough, Dana felt like Banner had just become her friend. Dana's device chimed and she checked it. Dean's ready to roll out. I have a few more people to meet. See you at the barn raising. Dana sat beside her brother as they drove back through the wastelands. Their destination was away from the coast, back the way they had come. The repository was being assembled in multiple places, and none of them near headquarters. Despite herself, Dana was looking forward to the launch. There was still the usual Wheeler work to be done, delivering salt rations to the freeholds and other projects. With Suresh's mine hit, the coastal projects were stepping up their desalination efforts. The supply of salt as a preservative was unlikely to be disrupted for long. Dana didn't even notice that she was sighing sadly as they passed the turnoff that would have taken them back to the valleys. One day, I'll take you back to your new home, Dean promised. Home, Dana repeated weakly to herself. I was so certain I could stay in that valley forever, resting under those trees. Have you heard from them? No, but that's standard procedure when there are Fringer patrols in the area, Dean admitted. If there was violence, they'd send up a flare, believe me. Odds are they're safely hidden still. Fringer policy is to hold a siege for a while. They won't starve. Siege tactics don't work on the self-sufficient. The Fringers are used to running down the hungry and desperate, people who would break the law because they have to roll the dice or starve. Fringers could save themselves a lot of work if they let the hungry eat. They can't. Fringers make their living off the hungry. If nobody broke the law, the first people to starve would be them. We just can't do anything about it. Dana waved that off. Hope against hunger. Dean smothered a smirk. You know, Ginny and Robbie put that outfit together for you because they couldn't figure out why you wore city grays. Ginny said she talks like one of us, but she looks like one of them. Everyone talks like this in the city. We all know the system depends on hunger. Resource controls everything for us. It's not a secret that people with resources have the control. You start to understand why the repository is such an appealing move. Dean nodded as if she'd just answered her own questions. I just hope it makes a difference. Me too. If there's one thing I've learned from Arcadia, it's that one is all it takes to get started. It's the whole philosophy out here. They knock out a salt mine, we still have the ocean. They knock out the scrap yards, we still have the old cities. She smiled a little. Like dandelions in the concrete, life thrives in the cracks. Dean couldn't stop smiling at his sister, but Dana didn't notice. Then his comm buzzed. Dean, I have our destination, Freya called. I'll take the lead. Dean slowed the rig as Freya moved in front of them. So, champ, your first barn raising. You didn't know where we were going? Dana gestured in front of them. Still don't. New security measure. Banner figures the city's looking for gatherings, so if the gatherings set their final destination at the last minute, it's like a double blind. I knew the sector. Freya gets the coordinates when we get closer. Pain in the neck, but, that's the world these days. They drove for another hour. Dana yawned a bit, dozing in the passenger seat when he nudged her awake. Almost there. I won't really know what I'm doing, Or rather, that's Dana, sorry. Almost there. I won't really know what I'm doing. Well, you know more than you did when you first got out here. Besides, you know how to operate a 3D printer and wire an electrical cable. There's plenty to do. Everyone knows what parts you need for a rig, and everyone pledges to bring some of the list. We put it all together. A new wheeler means the work gets spread out a little wider. Arcadia can reach a little further. A few more options available. Dean smiled happily. Gotta admit, I had hoped the next one would be you, champ. When you first joined us, I thought... His voice grew slack with horror. Dana turned to look out at the plains, and her face turned to stone, too. There were thick clouds of black smoke rising from ahead of them, right where the barn raising was meant to be. The only tracks leading in were those of Wheeler vehicles. Every one of them was destroyed, flames already going out as they'd consumed everything in reach. Their smoke kept pouring off the debris. Dean pulled the rig to a halt. Freya turned to her equipment, scanning the whole spectrum. No signals, not even encryptions. Whatever hit them looks like it left. It wasn't sabotage, Dean scowled. Nobody put a bomb in a cargo container. Everything got hit. This was a full-scale drone fleet on a bombing run. He looked to the sky. How is this possible? Why would they go this far? Dana stared at the smoke and ruin, squeezing her brother's hand. No bodies, she thought aloud. Why are there no bodies? Then she saw movement and let out a yell of shock. Like something out of a horror movie, there were people emerging from the smoke, moving slowly. Dozens of them, almost 100 of them, eyes wide from shell shock, clothes soaked with water and sweats, faces blackened with ash and smoke. They looked almost like a zombie horde as they shuffled out, but Dean relaxed instantly. Juhani, he shouted to someone he recognized rushing over. What happened? Juhani looked quietly stunned. We had about 20 seconds warning. They just flew in and started firing. He scrubbed his face, moving the suit around hideously. We always hold our barn raisings near the solar shelters. If there's surplus, we can leave it for the next guy to come this way. When they came... His voice trailed off. Dean looked to Freya and let out a breath. Bring water and whatever first aid you've got. Freya nodded in agreement. Dana, I'm rated for field medicine. You're not. Not yet. Do me a favor. Call Banner. Tell him to get here faster. Banner was already heading in their direction, preparing for the launch of the repository. When he got the call, he came quickly. Dana saw his beacon light up for a moment, letting them know that he was there. Dana turned her back on the smoke and went to meet him as he pulled up. He had the same look of horror and disbelief. Dana imagined her own face must have the same look. Dana filled him in before he could ask. Casualties are lighter than they probably should be. There are solar refuge shelters around here, and when they heard the drone fleet coming in, they went underground. Some of them didn't make it, but most of them did. Hidden underground, there's not even much in the way of injuries. The one that were hit, well, they don't need a doctor. We'll have to call in some transportation for the survivors. Banner agreed as he looked over the smoking carnage. I really thought I could head it off. He headed over towards Dean. One of us will have to call Yana. Banner placed the call to New Eden and was told to stand by for Yana. Dana sat with him for a moment while Dean organized the evacuation of the survivors. She still felt like she was sitting in the principal's office next to him. Listen. Everyone got the location details at the last minute specifically so nobody could prepare another attack, at least not from the ground. Banner sounded exhausted. The Fringers are just hitting us wherever they find a target to shoot. Dana shivered. It was the first time anyone among the Wheelers had suggested that violence could escalate. Do you really think so? People in your world can't tolerate disagreement anymore. As far as the city-states are concerned, they still own the whole continent. Think they'd be willing to live and let live? Dana was notably silent for a long moment. When you asked me that just now, my response was, no, they'd rather kill you all. She shook her head slowly. Except that I still can't think of a reason why. I mean, there's the laws, of course, but you're not wrong when you say there's almost nothing out here that the Seed leadership cares about. Banner nodded. Dana frowned. Banner, you're in charge of security for the Wheelers. Give me a straight answer here. Why do they make attacks on Arcadia at all? Going on a year now, everyone I met has taken that as certainty, and I don't understand why. They're afraid. It's the only way they know how to fight the inevitable. The screen pulsed, and Banner sat up straighter in his seat. Get your brother. Freya, too. They'll probably want to sit in on this call. The attack puts 451 into question. The first part of the call to Yana was updating her on the wounded and injuries. The shelters had protected the people, but they needed help getting somewhere safe. The journey was too long to go on foot, and the weather was turning colder. Once the immediate casualties were cared for, the conversation turned to strategy. Yana, I believe we may be looking at a worst-case scenario here. Yana nodded, looking noticeably older. You seem sure they were after 451. Yes, but the barn raising wasn't involved in that. Dean wanted to confer with them, but they were trying to restore or replace lost vehicles. There's only one other possibility. They hit us here because they could. It's the only reason I can think of. The proverbial last straw, boss, Freya explained. I told you last week, the numbers of people fleeing the city have jumped dramatically. It's been a small problem for a generation, and the city's ignored it. Now that it's a significant one, and the city's given control... Well, now that it's a significant one, the city's given control to a guy who attacks on instinct. We've been making our way for more than a generation now, Yana. Think our days of simply being ignored are finally over. Then it is a war we're talking about, Yana said with solemn gravity. We might actually be seeing the opening salvos of a full-scale campaign against all of Arcadia. I'm afraid that's the most likely conclusion. We aren't a military power, Yana. If it comes to a straight fight, we'll be at a decided disadvantage. Yana was silent for a moment, considering. Dean, time to say something. Project 451 was your plan to head off a conflict. And it still works. The way they're brainwashed back in town, they think we're all cannibals out here. If public opinion means anything at all, 451 just became a major priority. Just wish we could have gotten it launched before the shooting started. Also, it's clear that the Fringers know about the repository. If they're taking it that seriously, we should too. And if their more aggressive policy is just about ideology, then getting the statics to learn more about how we do things, maybe even adopt a few techniques themselves, it would be like opening a second front back behind their lines, Freya added. If Banner's right about the repository being a target, you may experience some pretty heavy resistance. You aren't even close to launch yet, Yana warned. That's why we had planned to launch 100 copies. I can make it 200 if we put everything into it. Yana blinked. You think that's a wise move? I think it's our only move, unless we plan to abandon the project altogether. Dean made his case. The repository was meant to prevent a conflict. The conflict's starting. Our only other options are to fight or run. We launch 451, and we can let the information plead the case for us even after we've gone, one way or another. That's a bleak outlook, but I don't disagree. My concern is that you might not get that far if they're gunning for you. We'd still have to call the makers meet. Usual meeting place is close enough to the city, and the wind conditions are favorable if we put all our workshops on it. Get it launched from the assembly point before they can hit it? Think they can pull it off? Kaelin considered. The only real question mark is the helium. It's not a complicated bit of assembly, Dean offered. I can get our helium stocks and take it to the maker's meet personally. I've got 2 rigs. That's enough if we haul nothing else. Yana set her jaw. I appreciate you willing, Dean, but that's a pretty significant gathering of people. Banner's telling us the city's targeting your project and gatherings of Arcadians. You want both in one place? Heavy silence. Banner, what can you do to even the odds? Banner spoke. Unless we plan to cancel 451, I think making it a rush job's the only option we have of getting it done. If their drone fleet is spread out searching the region for targets, then being a lot closer to the walls might be a blind spot. My proviso would be that we change the location of the gathering enough that there's little time for the city to stage a drone strike. Since the helium's the only component we can't replace quickly, I'd also insist that only Freya and Dean know that part. They have an associate and an apprentice with them. Neither will be needed for the op. And I'll send Marco home for a few weeks. He has a new baby brother he's barely seen. If this does come to war, I want him out of the drone's range, Freya added. Though I don't think it's fair to use those words exactly. If you have a shooting war and only one side is shooting, it's not so much a war as it is an organized slaughter. Loud silence rang. We could. Dean cleared his throat. We could set up the jamming towers at the Maker's Meet. The drone wouldn't be able to get in the range of our people if we spaced them right. He's right. Drones have a very specific range, even in times of combat. The city-states care about the combat of things. Even in times of combat, the city-states care about the cost of things. They aren't built to work autonomously. If we can get them off course, they wouldn't be able to redeploy in time. And if we can launch several hundred copies of the repository, the whole thing will be past the point of no return anyway, Kalen added. On screen, Yana gave a nod. Then we're decided. The launch of Project 451 will be accelerated before the city can send another drone attack on the launch site. Dean and Frail will go personally, without anyone else, so that the source of the helium stockpile is not discovered. The Maker's Meet will devote itself to this task above all others, and countermeasures will be put in place to protect from remote attack. If the escalation continues, we will have to consider our position carefully. For now, we're hitting back with the only weapon we have, our way of thinking. Everyone made sounds of agreement and ended the conference. Dean looked over his shoulder. We'll need all the room I can make in the rig. We'll need all the room we can make in the rig. I'll move some things around. What about Marco? We're not expecting danger until the meet, and he has friends along the route we're taking. If we can talk him into staying with them until the launch, well, so much the better. Dana's personal effects were still in the valley. It had felt so unnatural a year before, leaving her home and everything she owned behind in favor of one shoulder bag. Now it almost seemed luxurious. In a year she'd never gone without. Food was kept in multiple places, as was shelter and water. Clothing could be printed, redesigned, and printed again. She'd been offered a cot in the valleys and traded it gladly for a bed of green grass and a canopy of trees. As the Wheelers packed up, Dana suddenly realized she had nowhere to go until the meet. The location and time was being kept secret so that nobody could lie in wait for it. Dean waved her over and unslung his motorcycle, almost identical to the one Morris had, and rolled it towards her. Thought it was time you had your own wheels. Dana gave the bike a hungry look. She had a few lessons from various people, and it was a very intuitive ride, but Dana was still surprised. What's changed? Dean glanced over her shoulder, then his own, making sure they were out of everyone's earshot. We both know the meet's going to be a target. We both know our best chance is to get everyone clear before they can gather a strike. If it looks like we can't get everyone back on their own wheels, it'll be a race to anything that can run. If there's an attack, being on foot will be a death sentence. She didn't say what she was really thinking, and neither did he. If the Fringers were after 451 specifically, Dean was a target. Getting Dana and Marco off the rig was also his way of keeping them safe, but neither of them would say so. Which made Dana think of the radio. Still in its concealed spot in Dean's rig, Dana had fully intended to destroy it every time she thought of it since the valley. Her hiding place had been small enough that he likely wouldn't make use of it, but like all long-held secrets, she wanted to deal with it when her brother wasn't watching. At least until now. Now, she suddenly believed it might be vitally important to have a way to talk to Crawley directly. We aren't there yet, she told herself. Dana had never owned her own vehicle before. Morris had let her drive his motorcycle once or twice, and she spent a few hours driving back and forth around the wastelands on her own before bringing up the map on her device and making her way to a charging station. Even with the threat lingering over everything, Dana had nothing to do. Swapping out her cell for a fully charged one, Dana stretched out under the sun. The sky had been overcast for much of the week, but the rains had long since passed, no longer coming in flooding monsoons. The chill that had been creeping in was now biting, and she turned her face up toward the sunlight, trying to drink it in. Her stomach growled, and she checked her supplies. Some fruit and honey preserves from the valleys, a wrap with some synth chicken filling, and a parcel of fruit rolls and sourdough. She considered her lunch for a long moment before she pulled her device from her vest to make a call. Buzzed twice before he answered. Hey, you. Hey there. Morris smiled at her from the screen. I was wondering if you were around. Word is, everyone with the printer's being hauled in for a meet sometime tomorrow morning. Not even telling where yet. You going? Yeah, but I can't tell you where either. I don't know for sure myself. Things are getting tense, Morris. The whole place is waiting for lightning to strike. Freya even sent her apprentice home for the duration. I've never seen the Wheelers be scared before. Back in the city, fear is a basic fact. That uncertainty, that worst case scenario, it's drilled into us over and over. I spent a year in the company of people who've never feared hunger. It's creeping in again. Yeah, I know what you mean. Morris sounded exhausted. It's been quite a ride. Speaking of rides, I acquired a motorcycle, Dana said proudly. My brother thought it was time I got my own wheels. You moved out of Dean's rig? The doctor was surprised. Temporarily. He's on a run, so I have nothing to do until the meet. I was hoping you'd know of something I could do to entertain myself till then. Well, I'd be happy to give you a list of suggestions, but as it happened, I was calling to let you know I'd be coming to the meet myself. Outbreak's finally over, and my patients are all officially out of danger. With the quarantine lifted, everyone's getting back to work. Maker's Meet might be geared more towards your brother's thing, but there's always a shopping list when you put a dozen or so printers in one place. So you'd be on your way then? We could always meet somewhere less secret and come to the meet together. That sound you hear is me rushing to your side at an unsafe velocity, he responded primely. Tell me where to meet you, and if you happen to have any more of them honey preserves, I hope to offer something enticing enough in return. Dana couldn't help the blush, but she was smiling. I'm sure I'll think of something. Okay, gang. I think that is a good little cliffhanger to end off on. Next time we will find out just what happens when Dana and Morris meet up. Um, in the meanwhile, oh, I forgot to promote while we were coming back from the BRB, the Codex. That little bug above my head. We are an official Twitch team, believe it or not, of fellow reading streamers. They have their own Discord, separate from my own Discord, which, by the way, I have a Discord. Fun fact. Uh, Essentially, we just are all reading streamers and we all kind of read different things. Some of us dabble a little more aggressively in author permission than I do, which I've just been dipping my toes into that. Some of us are fully only public domain. We range pretty widely on genre, so if you like what I do but you maybe don't like all of the stories I read, check the rest of the team out. They'll really they'll have something you'll like. What else while I'm promoting things? I already said the Discord. It's a great place for you to suggest new paper cuts books, talk about, bother me into uploading VODs when I get behind, um, chat about things we've been talking about on stream. You know, if I bring up something interesting and then veer back on a topic, but you have more to say, there is not only the general channel, but we also have an info dump channel. If you have a lot of information about something that you really want to share, that's what that channel's for. Bonus points if you manage to link sources or tell us where you're getting some of this information so that we can find out more if we're interested. It's very fun. What else? Oh, yeah, in the Discord, I've been posting a lot of my other various projects. You know, I've been doing a lot of visible mending and embroidery of late, which feels very on brand for this book. I post in progress shots, which no other Discord gets, nowhere else gets. Um, I post bread. I have a sourdough starter, and I post about once a week when I do a loaf of bread. only my Discord gets the crumb shots and everything. Other people just get, hey, I made a loaf of bread. Here's the outside of the loaf of bread. But the Discord gets exclusive content every now and again. Sometimes I will drop into a voice channel and start just streaming whatever I'm working on. Maybe I'm editing the podcast. Maybe I'm producing VODs, maybe I'm ripping media. It's the type of thing that I wouldn't necessarily want to put on stream, but I still want to have people available for like co-working purposes. And it can be fun, seeing what I find and what I come up with. Recently, I've been thinking about working on. I found a mysteriously labeled tape at a thrift store, and it has potential to be some very interesting lost media. So that might come up in the Discord if I want to entice you further. If you've been missing out on certain things, I've mentioned VODs a couple times. I have a YouTube channel under the same name, Glacier Nestor, and that's where all the VODs go up. If you want to catch up on things, they're on a little bit of a delay as I have to process them and you know watch them and everything. But I'm doing my best to catch up there. I've been stockpiling some videos to get back into the rhythm of things. I have what we've been doing tonight is actually a podcast as well. Uh, so if you have any particular inkling to enjoy this audio only and in an edited format, actually, not rather than purely live, I actually cut the podcast down a good bit, cut out a lot of the like pauses that I'm making or flubbed lines, that kind of thing, getting it a little closer to an actual audiobook. So that's the podcast feed, and I heartily suggest it. It's on as in the same way as the VODs, it's on a bit of a delay just for processing time for me. Um, I guess I have a TikTok. I'm not like super pressed about promoting it, but you know how it is these days. You gotta play into the short video algorithm to get people to pay attention. So, unfortunately, I do have a TikTok and I do upload things every now and again. I've actually been feeding content into the content mill behind the scenes over here, and the TikTok will be grinding back up to full speed very soon. Uh, Much as I don't love that, but that's me being an old curmudgeon. I think that's all my promotional whatnot. Um, Man, I'm really enjoying this book. I cannot wait to finish this book next time. This has been so, so good, and like the author has really, really depicted that sense of like the more you learn about how simple it can be to like do your own garden or like mend your own clothes or fix your own electronics, like why do we not do this more? Or like that sense of the best way I can describe it is that Onion headline, scientists say green energy is ready to go anytime. That that little crystal of like, why are we doing it this way? Why don't we do it better? The author has really depicted that journey in Dana very, very well, and I like that a lot. Anyway, I could carry on for much, much longer, but I think we should call it here. Uh, this has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't sting.